Going. Okay, so we're recording this, so make your comments really smart. Hey, Kelly, how's everything on the coast? Oh, maybe she didn't hear me. Well, we'll just skip all the way over to Eastern Oregon and ask Tim what's going on over there.
I'm watching snowflakes fall out my window right now. We've got about an inch on the ground, which is awesome because, yeah, it's really everywhere is suffering already for snowpack. So, but yeah, not much otherwise, just constant struggle of life and kids and everything else. Nothing major to, report on. Possibly going out hunting this weekend with some folks, trucker hunting. So we'll see.
How much snow is it looking like you're going to get a reasonable amount, or is it just sort of just getting started?
I think they're saying the mountains could receive up to 4 inches. They said here on the valley floor, trace to 2 inches. So
better than nothing.
Exactly.
Kelly, are you hearing us? It looks like it.
Yes.
Okay,
Can you hear me?
Now we've heard about snow on the eastern side. What's going on the coast?
Well, on the coast, the snow looks a little more like rain. So we are getting a little sprinkle. I just wish it would rain a lot more. It feels lovely to have the sunshine here, but I know we desperately need some rain. So I would love for it to just dump.
All of us.
But not too much. Yeah, it's lovely here. We've been Christmas shopping for trees in the woods, if you want to call it shopping, and got one last week. Saw lots of people out. There's a lot of people out recreating and getting trees off the national forest, so that's always good to see.
What's the favored tree on that side of the mountains over there?
A lot of people are noble fir people. They like to go get their noble firs, and they work really hard to go get them. But I'm kind of a sloppy Doug fir, Charlie Brown tree myself. I love the cedars. They're just not strong enough to hold all the ornaments and lights. I feel like they're,
Yeah, we have.
Thank you.
We got white fir over here. We don't have much noble fir, but we all try to get the incense cedar, which can work pretty well. Yeah. Hey, Murat, what's going on, Central Oregon?
Well, it's a little bit of rain this morning, probably not enough yet. We've been having lots of nice weather, and again, like everyone else, wishing for a little bit more moisture. And I've been running around a little bit, went to Northern California, basin and range country and alkali lakes, and lots of sunshine and geology and birds, and just kind of trying to keep breathing through December.
Where did you go?
Near Cedarville.
Oh yeah,
that's really Valley.
Nice.
Yeah, it's nice down there, but real drought.
Did you stay in the Cedarville Lodge over there where the hot springs?
Yeah, the hot springs. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, oh nice. Mark Lavhart, what's happening with you?
Well, I was just checking to see if the San Diego was still getting snow or not. So it was snowing a little bit this morning up on the San Diego, and the mountains are pretty well fogged in right now. So I hope it's snowing up there too. Well, it just got back from Hawaii, so spent a few days in Hawaii, kind of a getaway, and it's good to go and good to get back. But Carl, I saw some great news about some significant funding for the Klamath Basin. So I hope you report on that to the group. Sounds like there's some great opportunities there for some significant successes in the Klamath Basin. So I hope you tell us a little bit about it, more than I know, but be curious to hear. End of report.
Well, Mark, then I'll call on myself, because that's precisely what I was going to talk about. Is it an exciting time for the Klamath Basin right now? As everyone knows, we've been through quite a crisis, terrible drought. Farmers got no water, the lake got no water, the salmon got no water because there wasn't any water. So one of the ways, of course, the way the federal government tries to fix things is throw money at it, and they are. We've got somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million being earmarked for the Klamath Basin, coming through various pockets of money, which is really great. And people are trying to gear up. I think our biggest issue is going to be capacity and organization and making sure we spend money correctly. That being our biggest worry. We could certainly spend that much money and not be any better off for it, I think. So it's very exciting, but it's also a little bit stressful time because we don't want to blow it. I think if we blow this, we'll never get another shot at it. So it's a big deal. It really is, because it, you know, the thing about the Klamath Basin is it's fixable. It's not San Francisco Bay. It's not Portland. It's not the Columbia River. It's fixable, and the dams are coming out. So it's there's a lot at stake, and hopefully we can make it all work. But yeah, thanks for asking. That's what I was going to talk about. And OCRF, I think, can play a role in some of that, what's going on down here. And we'll see that a little later. I think we will be. Thanks for that, Mark, and asking. Mark Stern, what's happening with you?
Well, it was a beautiful sunny day here yesterday in Portland to get out and get about up into Forest Park, which is one of the projects we've funded in the past. And then the Saturday after Thanksgiving, we were out at the coast walking at Cascade Head on what must have been like the wettest moment of the year there. You could see about 10 feet in front of you. But it was fun to go through the big old Sitka spruce trees there. And it was also really neat to see the elk paths. I'm not going to call them track because you could see where the elk herds were crossing the trail. And it looks like they're having a good time roaming around the headland there. So it was it's always fun to be at the coast. So it was good.
Yeah, that's what makes living in Oregon so great. Davia, why don't we hear from you?
Everybody. My brother is in town visiting from New York right now, and so that always reignites my love of Oregon's outdoor places because I get to show it to somebody new. And so we took him to Silver Falls yesterday and just had a great time on the classic Trail of 10 Falls hike. And then on the professional front, this is an exciting week for the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. And hopefully you all saw my email about that. But the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee is hearing the bill on Wednesday. It's a one-issue hearing, just the Recovering America's Wildlife Act. So we've got enough momentum to get the attention of EPW, which is really exciting. And Senator Merkley is on that committee. So we're doing the best we can to bring him on board as a supporter of that. And then one of the things I'm working on here is talking with staff and our leadership about what we're going to do with $25 million a year going forward. And there's a lot of big dreams, and we're working on putting those in one place as what I'm calling the Recovering America's Wildlife Act vision. And there's certainly going to be a role for the OCRF in helping us match those federal funds if and when they come. And we're going to bring this through ODF&W's budget process as though the money is real for the 23-25 biennium to make sure we're truly ready for it. So that's been really engaging work to get rolling on.
Well, Davia, thanks for all the work that you're doing on that, and especially the wildlife, Recovering America's Wildlife Act. That is a big deal. And if ODF&W is wondering what to do with that money, I would just suggest they give it to us, and we'll make that decision for them. I think that's the smartest thing. Kaylin, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks, Carl. Hey, everyone. Similar things, looking forward to hosting family here over the holidays and wishing for more snow, which for us is a requirement before we go out and get the tree. As a matter of habit, that happens on snowshoes or skis. So fingers crossed there, but we have a new commission chair with the State Parks and Recreation Department, and sort of first project that she has wanted to kick off that I'm excited about contributing to is a state park vulnerability assessment and climate adaptation plan. A lot of the other natural resource agencies are further down that sort of stream of work, and it's only tangentially relevant to OCRF, but I'm just glad to see the state parks taking on that sort of work. And then personally, the winter solstice is actually one of my favorite days of the year, both because I love winter and because every day gets longer and brighter after that. So that's only a couple weeks away.
All right. Well, thanks, Kaylin. Mauricio, what's happening with you?
Hey, Carl. Hello, everybody. Good to see you. It feels now that every time we get together, it's kind of like, hey, see you guys. Good to see you. What's happening? What are we going to do this time around? What kind of adventures are we going to get into? Anyways, it's good to see your faces again. With me, well, in my household, the second Thanksgiving is over. It's like an elf's jar debris bin explodes in the middle of my living room. And so, of course, that's what happened. So now we have Christmas decoration everywhere. We went and got our Christmas tree in this one new place. I had no idea that there was such a shortage of Christmas tree farms around the Portland metro region. So we ended up having to go further. And we ended up finding this really amazing place that was just like perfect for my little girls. And that was a fabulous experience. We got a beautiful tree of a species that I was not familiar with. It's not a noble fir, it's some other that has like a silver leaf under thing. It doesn't quite smell like Christmas, but it's gorgeous and apparently lasts just as long. So we are going to have to outsource the Christmas scent as per my 4-year-old's. Want to see what that's going to look like. And then I have my grandmother visiting and staying with us. So she's upstairs and it's been such a treat. And also my 8-year-old cousin, who is just a year older than my oldest daughter. And so there may be some screeching and screaming, which of dubious nature that you may hear in the background every once in a while. But that's it. It's good to see you.
Mauricio, that's great, man. I think people are doing a little better getting family together over Christmas, and we're needing that so bad. It's so nice to have that happen. And yeah, so I think it's very attractive hearing what's going on at your house right now. Sounds great. Jane Hartline, how are you?
I am just fine. We're going to be talking about the Harbin and Frog Shuttle later, and that's what I've been obsessed with all morning because I'm the Monday night captain, and it looks like it could be really froggy weather tonight. So I may actually have to leave this meeting a little early and get out there right when it gets dark. So anyway, we just had a few frogs jump the gun so far, but this is about right now is when they really start to move, and they need a night just like tonight where it's above 46 and raining. So we're at the ready.
Jane, you're always doing something really cool. I really like that, man. You're always up to something. That's great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, all right. So I think did I miss anybody, Davia? Michelle, how are you doing?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm doing good. So now I'll listen to everybody's Christmas tree stories. I've got a new tradition that we do at my house. For years, of course, we've gone out and trimmed the tree, and came to the conclusion about 2 years ago that a live tree is a little much for me to be wheeling around, putting up and down by myself. So we transitioned over to, take my grandsons to plant trees. So every December or November, we go and we plant 12 trees, one for each month of the year. And so this last weekend we went up and planted 12 Douglas firs on some friends' property up in Silverton. So that was our Christmas tree adventure for the year.
Michelle, that's a great tradition. I like that a lot. All right. Well, great. Well, it's really nice hearing what everybody's up to. We do have a little bit larger audience today. Davia, did you want to introduce folks or wait till later?
Sure. Thanks, Carl. And I just note, I haven't seen Chris Hager in the room yet, but I think we're expecting him at some point. And then in the audience, I see Amy Ammerheim and Jamie Stevens, Jamie Ratcliffe, Ken McCall, Stephanie Wagner, Steve Wise, Tyler Dungannon, and someone labeled Van Dyke. And so if you want to put in the chat your affiliations, or in the case of Van Dyke, your full name, that'd be great. Thank you for joining us. There is time on the agenda for public comment later on. You can also send me a private message or put it in the chat if you want to make comment at that time. Thanks, Carl.
Okay, great. So two things I want, now that we've gone around the room. One, we still do not have a representative from the Northeast. I have emailed the governor's office and got zero response. We do have, in my opinion, a very qualified applicant from that area. Holly Atkinson has applied. She was a previous commission member. So it's really impacting us in terms of workload for people and committee assignments and things like that. So I was hoping that Mark Labhart, being the all-powerful political operative that he is, could maybe work on that a little bit. I'm not sure what routes he can try, but we had discussed this before. It really is getting to be a bit of an issue, and has been. So Mark, do you think you could reach out to anybody you know in the governor's office?
Yep, I'll give it a try. Yeah, I agree. We need to have a full committee. And so I'll wrangle some change a little bit, see if I can get anywhere.
I knew you would be the guy. We're very lucky to have Mark on the committee. I feel like he's somebody I can sick him on. I can sick him on people. So it's great. The other thing, not this kind of a pain that's related. Michelle, do you want to tell us a little bit about this reapplying issue that we have to do for the committee?
Well, I was working really hard to try to see if we could administratively extend your terms this time to make them a full 4 years. I haven't gotten any ground on that. So what the last that I heard from the executive appointments office is that you guys will definitely need to be resubmitting your applications. And I'm composing a letter that gives you some direction on that I should get out to you later this week. But we are looking at that. I have a meeting on the 20th with the director of the executive appointments office. So I'm going to push a little bit more then, but that really gives us no time to plan. So I think that preparing to resubmit applications is a good idea.
And what is the time frame, Michelle, on that? I mean, what's the soonest that we might be able to fill out an application? I'm just curious.
I think that it can be done anytime. What is like the most complicated part is the workday. If you have your if you have your workday sign in and you know how to get in and maneuver around workday, go ahead and get started. Might not be that easy to find where to submit those. So I've got to get some clear directions noted to get out to you guys right away.
So Michelle, we have, could we call you? Like if we're having trouble, are you the one that we should reach out to? Like I have no idea how to even get onto the site. And
if it's not me in the email, I will clearly identify who it is for which components, like who for Workday. Like I'm lost in Workday if I have to go in there and do anything that outside of my normal assignments. So we will provide you with a specific person to go to for Workday assistance.
Right.
Other topics, if there's things that I can't answer, I'll make sure that I list someone that you can reach out to that will have the answers.
Okay, thank you. We'll try to make this as simple as possible for everyone. So, okay.
I'll just note on that front, when you applied for your positions that you have now, it was just a PDF form with your resume. And now that we have this Workday system, it's automated, which in the long term should be better, but Workday has just gone live right at the time when you all need to reapply. And so we're trying to figure it out at the same time you are. But in theory, it should be easier next time if you apply for reappointment, because all of your material will be in there, but you'll have to upload some material this time around as you get started. But stand by for that from us on how to do it, but the timeline will be sometime in December is when you should do it.
Okay, well, with that behind us, our first item of business is to review and approve the minutes. Do we have that up, Davia, the motion? Can we get someone to move on these minutes?
I'll do it. I move to approve the October 6th and November 2021 meeting minutes with the continued authority to correct spelling, grammar, and punctuation.
And I will
I
second
would
that.
sec-
Ms. Jane.
All in favor, thumbs up. Looks pretty unanimous. Great. Okay. All right, so moving on the agenda, I think this is a point to talk about our funds available. As you know, we have received monies from different sources. We have received the money from our previous biennium, the money that we raised, we've received the match for that. We got several other pots of money available to us coming at various stages. And so I thought it would be important before we make final decisions about our funding, if everyone understood exactly where we stand with regard to funding. So Davia, do you want to give an update on that?
Thanks, Carl. So here is our sort of our standing slide that I love updating every meeting to let you know that so far we have generated $845,000 from non-state sources since the beginning of the campaign in January 2020. So we're just about to cross into 2 years of this work. And using a fundraising goal of just over $1.5 million to match the general fund we've been appropriated. That leaves us just under $700,000 to go this biennium in our fundraising goal. So we've made really good progress towards that goal. So as Carl mentioned, we've got a variety of appropriated fund sources from the 2021 session, and they all are accessible through different mechanisms. And so I wanted to be simple, but also give you all the information here. So I'll go one by one. The first is that House Bill 5006, which is the end of session budget bill, included $545,000 from the general fund to match what was raised for the OCRF last biennium. Those funds, the way that they're described in the bill, and from a process perspective, all ODF&W has to do is go and ask for those funds in each of our quarterly apportionments, and we'll have those. So we've been doing that the last couple opportunities, and by middle of January 2022, we will have all of that money in the OCRF account and able to be spent. And so that's all available for this round that we're on right now. That bill also gave $1 million from Oregon's apportionment of the American Rescue Plan Act funds. Those monies are federal funds that are coming into Oregon, and the Department of Administrative Services is then portioning them out to each of the organizations that were earmarked by that legislation. We've been working with Administrative Services. We provided all the information they've asked for on that front. We don't yet know a timeline for when those funds will become available and be deposited into the OCRF. So that's kind of a standby. We know there's $1 million coming. We don't know when. And those federal funds have a date of the end of 2024. So they go a little bit beyond this biennium. We don't need to spend them all this biennium. And then finally, there's $1 million of general fund from House Bill 2171 that is also for funds or to match private funds raised this biennium. The way that we access those is by going to the emergency board of the legislature, and we expect that they will meet in May, September, and December of 2022. And so we already have somewhere around $200,000 that is not yet matched. And so we know that in May, we will get at least $200,000 of that $1 million and we expect more based on what we raise between now and May. And so those are our 3 opportunities in 2022 to access that general fund money. So that's the status of those 3 pools of funds, plus the 4th pool being our private dollars. So to try to sum it all up, I made this very simple graphic for us. Of the green boxes are the revenue we've had, so the non-state funds that we've brought into the program, plus the $545,000 from the general fund, which we know we'll have in hand by January. And then minus our existing commitments, all of the projects that this group approved in January of this year and the projects from last summer. And then also some of the money from the general fund is kind of pre-committed to our 2 Forest Park Conservancy projects that should big restricted gifts come in for those projects, we've already committed some of that general fund. And so that leaves us right now with $402,891 available for the advisory committee to make recommendations to spend to the commission in January. And that is the current funds report.
So if you could leave that up a second, Davia, I think this is really important for everyone to sort of understand where we are. And maybe go back, Davia, to the previous slide. That might be better. Just to help us, you know, we're a going deal now. We've got a real thing going, and we've got to operate like a business. You know, we got a budget. We got to look at our cash flow. And the reality, and let me preface by saying we have not included the Fishhawk Lake settlement money in this. That money is open-ended. We don't have to spend it this biennium. One of the things about much of this money, except for the little bit of exception with the ARPA, is we have to spend it in this biennium. So we don't want to be caught at the end of the biennium not having spent it. And so we have to be very prudent in how we go about it. We also don't want to spend money we don't have. So the numbers, to help us understand, I went through this myself to try to figure out what we've got. So beyond the 402,000 that we have available to us currently, without considering the Fishhawk Lakes and assuming the ARPA funding is approved here relatively soon, that's $2 million there. Now, one thing to think about, it's not a full $2 million, because I think we all know that if we're going to be successful in raising that $1 million match, we're going to have to use our program of that 30% match. That's been extremely effective. We've been able to raise quite a bit of money. And I think without that, we will not raise $1 million. But with it, if we do raise $1 million, let's say every penny we raise is through that program where we're matching 30%. Well, the upshot of that is we'll have 700,000 of that to spend because we're matching 30%. So that money coming from the legislature won't be $1 million, it'll be $300,000 less. Now that's the best and worst case scenario, both of those. But what that gives us is $1.7 million to spend between now and let's assume ARPA is spent by the end of the biennium. So 1.7 million. We have 3 more funding rounds the way we're going. So that implies something in the neighborhood of $600,000 per spending round, which seems like a reasonable number. That could be a little higher because we are not going to have to depend 100% on that matching to raise funds. We're getting some through other sources. And so it'll be higher, but that's a good idea. So I think it's important to understand that. So the way I'm seeing it, without considering the Fishhawk Lake monies, which we could use to make those numbers bigger, but we've got 3 more funding rounds ahead of us to the tune of $600,000 each. So that kind of brings us to our current situation. We have just completed a funding round, and I hope you all had the pleasant experience I did reviewing these fabulous projects. And we went through our process and ranked them. So Davia, can you go maybe to the next, I don't know if you have the list of projects up there. That's probably a good time to put that up. So Davia did all the hard work of tabulating these numbers. And remember, this is all fallen to Davia now. We had Sherilyn helping us through a lot of this, but Davia did all of this herself. So once again, we owe a great deal of Davia. And she did some extra work for me and pulled out some numbers and averages and all of that. I was concerned that our list was going to be, that there would be some oddities in it, that programs didn't fall out in a rational way. But the reality was, once I looked at the list, and I hope for you too, I thought we really have a process that ranked these projects for the most part very, very accurately, I think, in terms of fulfilling our mandate. There's some tweaking we can do, but for the most part, I think we nailed it. So do you have that, the list of projects?
Yeah, sorry, the Zoom is not showing any of my PDF windows as an option for sharing, so I'm just quickly grabbing it from our website. So just give me 30 more seconds.
Okay, well, they're not, I've gone over that list so many times, I can more or less visualize it. So what happened is Davia and I and Mauricio, the steering committee of the committee, we met to talk about what we might do. And there was a couple of decisions that we as a group need to make. Oh, there it is. Great.
Sorry, I'm trying to make it bigger.
Okay. So here, I think you guys probably looked this over. It's a little confusing because the project number is on the left, but the real important thing is the rank. You can see that number. It's the rank of the project 1 through the 37 or whatever it was. Davia pulled out the score spread, like how variable it was. Like, was it kind of crazy that some people hated it, some people loved it. And for the most part, it was pretty tight. It was pretty tight in terms of the spread. Another important thing I thought to do was to look at our equity scores, because I think there are some concerns that we were going to miss some good equity projects because they maybe weren't that high on the conservation list, and that's what we rank so highly. So she pulled those out so we could look at the average equity scores. And then, of course, those are the projects and the amounts. So as you recall, our original intention was to have a process where we spent $300,000 selecting 15 or so projects at $20,000 each. Well, if you go to 15, which is Hike It Baby, or Bring It Outside project, that's a pretty low number. It's in the low 200s when you add it all up, because some of the ones we selected were for 6,000, 10,000, 6,500. So even if we stayed at 300, we could maybe move down the list a bit. So then I started looking at this a bit harder. And again, with Davia and myself, we realized that there was going to be a situation where we just had to draw a line. Before we move to that discussion, I want to bring up another thing that came up and when we discussed it. There was only one project that for us was really not in that sequence, that was a little bit out of order from what we felt was something we might consider funding. And that was, let me move things around so I can see this. I can't see what, oh, there we go. And that project was number 25. That was a submission from People of Color Outdoors. an organization we have worked with in the past with very positive outcome, and is precisely the type of organization we felt was going to need some help. They don't have the sophistication that many of these other programs do in terms of writing grants and all of that. It was the only project that we assessed that got a perfect 6 on its equity score. So we felt like it was important to include that project. So I'm going to just go ahead and follow out with the three of us would like to recommend we do, and then we can discuss it. But that would be to take that number 25, the People of Color Outdoors, and include it in our list, and basically go down the list till we hit the amount of money we've got to spend. And that takes us down to number 22, the Wallowa Land Trust project on the East Moraine. And I know a little bit about that particular project. That if we were to do that and include that People of Color Outdoors project in that list, it adds up to $391,000. That pretty much spends the money that we have. I could not think of a reason to save that money. There was, you think, oh, maybe we should save it for a rainy day. Well, there's not really a rainy day for us. We will be able to bump up our funding to around 6, maybe 700,000 for the next rounds. And this one, we got money on the table right now. I think we ought to get it out the door. The last project on the list would deplete, the Wallowa Land Trust project would deplete us pretty much to what we've got in the bank. So I felt like that was a fair way to do it. We just followed our scores. So our proposal is just that we cut the line at number 22, but also include number 25 for the reasons I outlined. Again, that brings us to 391,000. So with that, thank you for listening to that long process. I've been thinking about this all week and going over it with Mauricio and Davia and some of the other members. And I just throw that out there for your comments. Mark Stern.
Yeah, hey, Carl. So I guess a question, like I clearly understood our financial situation when Davia presented it to us, because that was some nice graphics and it was very straightforward. I understood sort of conceptually what you explained, but to be honest, it was a little hard to track. So I guess my question really is, we have 402,000 available now. And then you made reference to, we have another 1.6, and I see the 1 million from the American Rescue Act. That'll become available presumably at some point, but I didn't quite see where the other 600,000 was or so, if I think you were referring to, or 700.
It's actually 700 because that's the money, the match money from the legislature. That's the money. Once we raise $1 million, we get another $1 million. So that,
I can clarify, I think, Carl.
yeah, okay.
So Carl is talking about the $1 million from the general fund. And if we were to raise the non-state money to match that, all from restricted gifts that require us to give a 30% match, we would be left with 700,000 somewhat unrestricted from that general fund. Because if we go about raising $1 million purely with restricted gifts, we are going to be committing $300,000 of our general fund. And so that's where that 7 comes from.
Okay, so basically it's the assumption that we will raise that remaining $699,000. That then gives us the 1.7, Carl, that you're referring to.
Correct. If we raise them, if we raise that million, which as Davia said, we're already down the road to that. And I think we will be successful in raising $1 million. That will release $1 million. And the very least we will get is 700,000, because let's assume, I'm sorry, I guess I've thought about this so much, it seems right in front of me, but if we continue our process that we're doing and we invite appropriate projects that we can raise the big numbers we need to raise, and we raise $1 million from donations to those projects, just like we have with Forest Park and the Sea Otter project, that we have brought money from the outside in. We use that towards our match to receive that $1 million from the general fund. But to do that, we've committed 30% of it to those projects, not to our solicitation. So that means we'll have $700,000, not $1 million. But for every dollar that, and I just use that to make it almost a worst case scenario. For every dollar that we raise, that's less money that we have to raise through the other mechanism. And that money goes to our regular solicitations. So if we raise 200,000, which I think is very reasonable, let's say we raise $200,000 through the ODF&W website and through our website. I mean, the numbers might be confusing, but that's $200,000 towards our match. Well, then we only have to raise $800,000 through our 30% matching program. And it comes out to like, then we get 770,000 or something like that. But I wanted us to understand what the numbers were going to be available moving forward and how that would look over the biennium. So and again, this is not including Fishhawk Lakes.
And also to clarify there, Carl, I think it's not including the non-state money that we do bring in, right? So it's $1.7 million that needs to be spent this biennium, and our non-state dollars that helped us release that general fund would also be in the bank, but doesn't have a timeline to make sure we spend it right now. So it's kind of like a minimum. We need to spend a minimum of 1.7 this biennium, because those general fund dollars disappear at the end of the biennium.
I'm sorry if that's confusing.
I'll try to make a diagram.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to figure all that out, and so it makes sense to me, but it took me a long time to get there. But that's basically it. And the reason I wanted everyone to understand that, to put in context the fact that we're spending $400,000 now. If we make this election, it's not like, oh, we need to save some money so our next one will be bigger. The next one's already going to be bigger. And there's no reason in my mind to save money, to say, oh, well, let's cut it off at 15 or 17 or 18 because we'll spend the money later. I think if our projects were all crummy, I might think that, but that's not what I saw when I went through them. I'm really disappointed. There's several others down the list that I wish we could have funded. So that's our proposal. And again, if there's any other clarifications for the Kelly.
I didn't need another clarification, but I just want to say, first all, Carl, I appreciate your enthusiasm. I love that you're like, of course we'll raise $800,000. No problem. Your constant source of positivity and trust in that is really lovely, and it brings good energy to this. So thank you. But what I wanted to say is I actually appreciate you guys giving a lens to this one, because in my scoring, it actually scored really high too. The only places where it didn't really was some of the conservation stuff. But I also know we made some notes in some earlier calls about how we need to be careful to be show inequity, because not everybody has the same skill set coming into it. So I think it sounds like this group, especially with you guys that do have experience with them, that they can deliver the product. They probably just need a little bit more guidance in making some relationships with some of the local councils and the land trusts to get some more partners on the ground to deliver the information. And I do feel like it's a really good showing to say we support you and we want to help lift you up. So I worry about equity among other, applicants and just feeling like, why do they get it? But it is one of the things that we highlighted that we really wanted to support was equity in this process. So I think this is a good way to show some of that. So I appreciate your proposal.
Kelly, thank you so much. You articulated that way better than I did, but you nailed it. Thank you very much. Jane?
I put a lot of stake in the staff comments and the way they prioritize these projects. And it seems like there are quite a few in this top bunch that they like the proposals just like they are. In a few cases, they had some really valid suggestions. And I know Davia has worked with some of the organizations in the past to see if we could work out some of these issues. And I'm just wondering if that's going to be the case, that if the staff has some valid points, are they just going to get the money for the proposal as is, or are there a certain number that are sort of conditionally approved if Davia can work out some of the staff concerns?
Thanks for that question, Jane. I think it's a good one, and it points to when we go forward that this time around, because we're trying to go fast, we did staff review at the same time as committee review. And so for our next round, we want to sequence those so that we can make sure you see that staff review while you're doing your scoring. But yes, what we've done in the past with this is if the committee wants to go forward with the project, we've worked with the applicant to weave that staff recommendation into their grant. So once it's approved, that those things will be reflected in the grant. And so I think the areas where we wouldn't be able to do that is those areas where staff said that they're not sure that the project will meet the objectives. I think there's just the one for that. But I think if the committee wanted to conditionally improve projects, that is also possible and reasonable.
That would make me feel better because I do think some of the staff comments would greatly improve the projects. So yeah, I don't know how we would word that, or whether it's just kind of a given. We don't really have to say they're conditionally approved. I'm not sure how that would happen.
Well, Jane, is there a particular project that you have in mind, or projects that stood out to you in that regard?
I'd have to look at the list again. I did make notes on them, but in a couple of cases, they said, like on the, let's see, on the Vesper Sparrow project, they said, why aren't you using Modus? And the Woodland Restoration Project, they said, if the interpretive signs aren't going to be visible to the public, maybe we should fund those. Anyway, I made several weeks.
Well, Jane, I think Davia and I, as we went through this, recognized the problem that arose because we had the staff review these at the same time. And so what our proposal is going to be later on in the meeting, that we make our whole process a bit longer, and it won't have to be too much longer, add a few weeks, so that the staff can look at the projects first. And then as we rank them, we'll have that information. So that, I think moving from here forward, we'll have that addressed. So we'll be able to incorporate what the staff says into our own processes and how we think about the projects and rank them. As far as trying to deal with the situation you bring, I think certainly these projects that we've ranked and if we approve them as we stated, we can certainly go to the entities with the comments and strongly recommend they consider those and how they proceed. I think trying to go through one by one or picking out specific issues at this point would be pretty cumbersome. However, in the future, I think it would be, you can have those caveats because we'll have had time to go through the recommendations and say, well, I want to approve this one because, I want them to do what ODF and W said. So I think we'll have a mechanism to do that, to address that in the future.
That's great. And I just think, yeah, they should definitely hear about those comments, and that, hope we could be flexible enough that they could incorporate some of those things.
Right.
Without having to come back.
Jane, so one of the things there is that all of the applicants have seen the staff comments, and we actually have had a couple of the applicants already respond to the questions, which is great. And so in a future process, you'll have those answers to the questions when you're looking at it. But for right now, my plan is to go back to the projects that you recommend and ask those questions in the interim, and we'll try to incorporate it into the final grants. And most of them are not to the point of changing the approach of the project so much as changing what information they collect or why, but there are a couple that would be changing the approach, and those are going to be more nuanced. And I'm not sure we can go completely there.
Great.
Kelly?
Yeah, thanks, Carl. I just had one other question that was kind of the flip side of the equity question. And this is one, I'm just going to use the Trumpeter Swan one as an example for this, where it was one of the lowest scoring equities that were in the funded section. And then the comments, I'm thinking of like future considerations here, like where it is the staff, it's actually funded under the staff recommendations. It was also a really low priority. And then they also said, this is really understood, doesn't change the conservation trajectory for the species. So I'm wondering if we might want to think about that in the future too, whether, if it's not really hitting a real conservation goal either and not really hitting an equity goal. I realize it's an important project, important species, but how do we kind of weigh that out so that we're really putting our money in the places where it matters and can move a trajectory or the trajectory of an organization to do more of that work. So just a thought.
Kelly, that's a great thought. And if that particular project was one of the ones that we looked at as we went through that because of those comments. But again, part of it, I think we'll address that if we can get the ODF and W input beforehand, and could go back to the entities and say, look, you want to change this a little bit. But I again, and I looked at that particular project, and ultimately I scored it pretty highly just because it's a species in the conservation strategy and all of that. So I think we're learning as we go, and I really appreciate these comments because it'll make it better as we proceed. And it's also important for the entities in the audience are hearing how we're thinking about this stuff. So they're going to want to tailor their projects so that they address these concerns. Not to digress too much, but another thing we're going to talk about is for our next round, making it really clear what we want. And when we put out this RFP saying, here's the things we're going to look at. And one of these is going to be the ODF and W staff is going to vet these beforehand, and certainly it would be to their advantage to talk to folks before they actually write the project. So hopefully we can address these as we move forward without being too disruptive in the short term. So, any other comments on Mauricio?
Thank you, Carl. So another lens that may be useful to us, and also a part of the proposed criteria for this first, the funding of these projects, is that so the RFP, as per some of the commentary from some of those folks that were sending projects, did feel heavily weighted into the conservation side of things. Like some were asking, like, is this really for, like, is this something that, of course, I mean, we're conservation and recreation. That's somewhat of a concern that has been brought to us before. And so if we are really trying to find a balance there, when you look at the first 22, up until, if you were to take that same amount of money, you went down the list, you'll notice that about 70% of those, if not more, are either studies, research, technology things, and only 3 of them, one more of a mixed thing, was really addressing anything other than conservation. So to me, it makes sense for us to try to bring some of those, particularly those in the outdoor equity space, to be back in play. Similarly, for the same criteria that you mentioned, as based on the staff recommendations, I think that we can, there's some weights that we can, move about. And that felt to me that would be at least a good faith attempt of trying to bring a little bit more balance into that double mandate for us.
Mauricio, thank you for that. And in fact, I think we're going to have an opportunity to talk about that in our next agenda item, that very thing. And so I know that Tim Davis has indicated he's going to have to leave because of school issues. Tim sent out, I thought, a very interesting and compelling email about his thoughts, having gone through these projects, and was regard to the recreation piece. And again, I think, Tim, when were you planning? Were you going to be leaving in the next 20 minutes or so, or?
I got time.
Okay.
So.
Well, because what I was going to say, if you're going to be leaving, I'd have you tell us now, but we're going to move into that discussion, and you can give your thoughts then. That I think that's the time we had carved out for it. So those 2 things, what Tim had been thinking about and what Mauricio said, we're going to have an opportunity to kind of chew on those in our next item, which is got a couple of other things having to do with priorities, but also our program. Okay, so back to this particular issue with that proposal, as I said, to fund these to Project 22 and to include the People of Color Outdoors project. Are there any other comments on that? Well, if not, would anybody like to make a motion?
Did draft one based on what Carl said, if you want me to throw that out there.
Yeah, please.
I'm sorry, Davia, what did you say? I missed that.
I said I drafted a motion that I think captures your proposal.
Oh, okay,
that I
okay.
could put up if you want me to.
Put it up. That's great. Dang, Davia, you do all the stuff.
I'm happy to do it, but I don't know if it'd be appropriate since I was in the prior conversations. Does that feel okay with everyone?
All right with me.
Jane,
It's all right with me. You're on the committee.
and you're off mute, Jane. I don't know if you wanted to. Oh, never mind. You went back to mute. Okay, I'll go for it. I move that the committee recommends expenditure on the projects ranked 1 to 22 in this round, and project number 37, People of Color Outdoors, Guardians at Whitaker Ponds, as described in December 6th meeting materials for consideration by the commission, with the ability to increase expenditures for projects if restricted gifts are received for those projects.
Do we have a second?
Finding my mute button. This is Kelly. I'll second that.
Great. So we have a motion and a second for a very important issue. I think it's important to ask for discussion at this point. Is there any other discussion on this? Okay, well, all in favor, thumbs up. I think we got it. I think we've got a unanimous vote. Okay, well, I don't know about you guys. I feel pretty darn good about that. I think we've got some really great projects. I'll just point out one, the project in the Klamath Basin with the Klamath Tribe answers some really big issues here and is really important and is going to be a contribution to what we're trying to do in the basin. And as a resident of the Klamath Basin, I want to thank the committee for making that happen. And I think you all may feel the same about projects in your area that you know about. And we should all feel good about this. All the work you guys are doing and making this a reality. And I think we've got some really good projects that we funded. And I feel good about the process and how we went about it. Okay, well, great. Well, thank you all for that. And while I feel good about the process, I also realize we can make it better, as has been brought up in the comments. And that brings us to our next discussion. We have a couple of things to talk about in terms of the application process and getting ready for the next grant funding opportunity. I think it's really important to our applicants that they know what we're going to be looking at, what are our priorities, and get that out there, including the fact that the ODF&W staff is going to review all these projects beforehand and give their recommendations to us. So that helps make this a better process, a more transparent one. And so as usual, Davia has put together a nice draft about some of these changes. And at some point, Davia, and I'll bring up the strategic programs, strategic projects program and how we can codify that, but I'll turn it over to you for this discussion.
Thanks, Carl. And I figured to try to give us a little structure here. One of the things that we should be thinking about is our RFP that we sent out in August suggested that we would open the next round in November. And then we weren't quite ready in November. And so we should be thinking about, are we ready in December? Because we definitely have applicants that are interested and ready. And in order to do that, I put together the proposed expenditure framework changes to help guide that process. And I think once we're comfortable with the language in the expenditure framework, we could go live with an RFP and spend a little time tweaking sort of the math on the criteria and things like that at later meetings, as long as the applicants are aware of what the criteria are and what the committee will be looking at. So my plan here was to just share that draft document and just walk through it. Hopefully everyone had a chance to look at it in advance. If you are watching online, the materials are on the website too, if you want to look through those. Okay, so we're looking at this Word document here, and this is the framework the committee put together just under 2 years ago, but somehow it feels like a long time ago. So we've got our vision statement, and I just made a few tweaks to that, I think, to try to capture how we've been functioning. Any comments on the vision? Okay, and then the expenditure section here, I made a few tweaks to that are trying to just reflect that the advisory committee is now a long-term entity rather than a one biennium entity, and pulled out some of the sort of stricter funding language that went along with our original framing. One of the truly new things here is this idea that we're going to offer a competitive opportunity twice per year. And that amounts to 4 opportunities per biennium. And so that's a proposal that I think the committee should decide if that's what you want to do. And I think that tries to reflect the idea it takes 5 to 6 months or so for each opportunity. And so that the committee will always be working on one at a time.
I think that makes sense, and it's a good suggestion for sure.
Okay, and I added a reference to the idea that we will still consider projects sort of outside that normal timeline, and that the framework for that comes up back at the end of this document. So this section that outlines what we may spend the funds on is directly out of the framing statutes, and so that's a copy and paste job that I think we'll always have there. And then I added to our expenditure details reference to that matching large restricted donation section that we've been talking about. And And then just reference to the idea that the actual amount of funds we have is always going to be somewhat based on what funds we bring in. I have not proposed any changes to who can apply, and it's a pretty broad public or private nonprofit organization statement. One of the questions that has come up is, can we fund federal entities through this program? And the answer is administratively yes. That's very doable. And I noticed some of the comments on some of the projects we had from federal partners were about should we be funding federal partners? I thought that's a question worth considering today.
Davia, I have a question on this page on the other expenditure details. There is no minimum or maximum limit on financial requests. Is that we have put limits on that?
So that there's no statutory limit, and so that kind of
Alright.
reflects the idea that at some point you may ask for projects that are up to 100,000, but there's no legal requirement on what you can or cannot do.
I see. We can.
Do we need to add the
that
word
doesn't-
statutory just to make it clear?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
Carol.
yeah, we can make that decision on maximum or minimum, right?
Something like that.
That's perfect.
I would just offer, instead of saying will, say may. And that leaves you some flexibility there. Because you may or may not do that. If that's okay.
Anything else there or on the who can apply? Kelly, I see you talking, but but you're on mute. Okay, she's talking to someone else. Okay, I'll move down to the program priority section. And so this first part of the program priority section, it looks like a lot of textual changes. I just took the language out of the outdoor equity statement and inserted it here just for some consistency. So we had written.
Kelly, or
Yeah.
Davia, could you make that just a little bit larger on your screen? On my little laptop, it's kind of hard to read.
Great idea. Is that better? Yeah.
Davia, that appears to me to spell out very nicely that encapsulated how we have discussed this, is that we have talked all along about making the outdoor equity piece just part of how we proceeded, and I feel that wording is appropriate.
Excellent. And like I said, I think I didn't really try to change the meaning so much as just add consistency by using the outdoor equity statement.
My question on this is, will this change how we score the projects?
I think that's up to you. I think in terms of this exact text change, I don't see a change in our process.
I think what this is leading to is once we have all these priorities in our concepts of what it is we're all about, and that's a changing target to some degree, but hopefully we'll land on the one that works, we can then every round, we can tweak how we grade projects. And as we have a whole category for equity that we can expand or change or reduce or whatever. And so we have that ability to impact how we score these projects as we move forward. But this is more of the basic outline of who we are and what we're doing. Is that accurate, Davia, for this part of the?
Yes, I'd agree with that. And then I think the one place where it will start to come in is in how you as reviewers are ranking the sorry, I'm looking for the criteria that has the greatest weight. So the criterion that we use about alignment with the conservation strategy and alignment with our program priorities, I think that's where it will affect the scoring. Is if the proposal I have here is to sort of make these program priorities more clear. And so going down, or trying to go down to the next section here. I accidentally opened our headers. Hold on. And then we can get into what that proposed program priority is. And I think, Jane, that will affect the scoring.
So I just have to get on my soapbox about that I don't think all the projects have to be people-centric, and that there are some very good science conservation projects that may not score quite as well on the people parts of it. And I personally think that's okay. And by the same token, there may be some projects that are less non-human centric that may be good too. And to make people sort of artificially do both doesn't always work when you're trying to do conservation science.
Yeah, I think
true,
I would,
Jane.
no, go ahead, Kelly.
No, I was just going to say it's true. As somebody who writes grants for a living too, you know, sometimes we try to match them up really hard, but I find sometimes you just need to walk away from that opportunity. So we're not going to be the right opportunity for everyone, but I think balancing that will be important.
I will say I had those same thoughts, Jane, and I went through, we ranked a lot of projects ranked the way we have set up this criteria and the way we score it. We got a lot of projects that did not have very high equity scores that got funded. I mean, it certainly didn't preclude that. It helped some get funded that maybe weren't as strong in conservation, but there were several that really there's no way to make them be equity projects, and they still got funded. So I think while our process may not be perfect, I think it's pretty good. You know, I think it's hitting, and again, part of this whole process is to tweak it and try to make it as reflective of the things that are important to us as we can. So.
And I agree with you, Carl. And I think one way to know that the criteria is working is by looking at those first 20 projects. You can see that there are lots of ones and twos that made it that are mostly about conservation. They have nothing to do with outdoor equity. And I think, so and there's another piece of this that I feel is probably relevant, and which is that while he's not people-centric, those managing those projects are people. And if there is a way to have those teams have that as a way to think about themselves, you know, about who is involved, who is given any particular job, I think it goes back to the very center of what is the difference between diversity and inclusion. For instance, you know, diversity is just about numbers, but inclusion is about belonging. And so, and you can read this in different layers as pertain to the work that we're doing here. But I feel that I don't think that needs to also make someone who's creating a project try to come up with how is that they can fit into the equity framework, if what they're doing, it's already great work for in terms of the objectives of the conservation strategy. But at the same time, if they happen to have access to folks from underrepresented communities that could partake in that research project that is nature centric. I think it's still worth mentioning it to some degree. So that's sort of what I'm totally with you in the sense, Jane, that we don't want to make it all about humans. But since humans are those managing those projects, at least that aspect of it could address some aspects of equity as well.
Thanks, Mauricio. You have great insight into that stuff. And that's part of our goal, is to try to impact how people think about these things. And if we can do that through this application process, all the better.
And I'll just draw your attention to the chat. I think Steve dropped off, but he's from the Pompadour Bluff project. And when we sent out the score sheet, he noted that his project did not score well in the outdoor equity criterion. And he happened to be meeting with his leadership the next day. And he used that as an example of how their organization should be thinking more about that. And so I think that by having it in our framework, we can help make those conversations happen, which is an exciting example of that working in real time. So I can move down here to the conservation project program priorities. And so I think this is where we can start trying to hone in on actually influencing our criteria and the scores that are being given a little bit more consistency. And so I took these 3 priorities and I condensed them down into 2 because I felt like the third one kind of is somewhat captured in the second one. And then I added for all of these in the recreation category as well, a draft statement of the highest priority. And so if we keep using our current scoring, where committee members are giving a score of 0 to 6 for each criteria, for the alignment with program priorities, these highest priority statements could be a 5 or a 6, for example. And if you're not sort of hitting one of these, for example, if you're doing a habitat project or a habitat connectivity project, and it is not in a conservation opportunity area, you wouldn't be able to get them the maximum points. And that just try to help give some consistency and striation to the scoring that we give. So these are just draft statements from our conversation a couple weeks ago about ODFW's highest priorities for implementing the conservation strategy, that this might be a way to help frame that and add a little more detail.
Hey, Davia, I think it's fine. I think just one thing I noticed, it's not necessarily easy to tell if the projects are in conservation area, opportunity areas. I mean, I forget how many there are, but there's a lot of them in the state and they're scattered. So it's just maybe a note that somewhere, perhaps there's a link so that one can readily see where the conservation opportunity areas are if they're thinking of a project, or vice versa if we're trying to review a project. And maybe that's there. I just didn't come across it when I sort of poked around quickly.
Yeah, I think it'll come down to how we collect information about these projects to be able to demonstrate it. But we do have the compass geospatial component of the conservation strategy, where members of the public, anyone can input a simple line drawing on a map, and it'll tell you if it's a conservation opportunity area and which strategy species have been observed in that particular location. So we should be able to do this one.
Yeah, thanks. I guess one other comment, Davia, and you sort of have it down below, and we've had some conversation about it. Under the committee review criteria, and I know you're not there, but the one about the impact of proposed actions, I think that's an important piece, and I don't know if it also needs to be reiterated up in these project priorities, but just somehow beginning to make the distinction between, what's having a conservation impact at scale. Putting up one bat box for a particular species in a conservation area might, check those two dots as they're listed now, but I think what we're really interested is in projects that maybe have a bigger impact as you outlined in the criteria there. So I don't know if there's an opportunity or to incorporate that above, or if that's appropriate, but that's what comes to mind at the moment.
I think there's, Mark, I think there's several things like that idea of scale that doesn't necessarily have to be in this piece, but we can incorporate that into our scoring that lets the applicants know what we really are going to value. This is a pretty broad statement here, and as we get into it, there's certain things that we could really, in a way, just like we did with the equity piece, we have a category where we can add points basically that are for really good equity projects. The other, the extension of that would be, we could have, and this, I'm just throwing this out because it occurred to me as we had these discussions. In our scoring, there could be things where we could add or remove points from our final score. And one of those things might be scale, where you would say, is this a big project or is this a little thing that is going to affect an acre of oak woodland somewhere? Like, for instance, the Modus project versus, a 10-acre grassland piece. You might, if we had a category where you could add 1-2 points, you could add 2 points to your score for a really high impact project. Say an example would be the Modus project, or you could say, well, this isn't that big, so I'm going to give it a 0. Or if it's really focused, you could take 1 away. But that may be one way to address those, and then make it clear that that's part of our process. There are a couple of other ones that I think we'll get to when we get to that point. Did I make myself clear on that or not?
I think if I could summarize that, the program priorities are sort of the what kind of work we're looking for, projects that do these kind of things. And then once we get into the criteria and how we'll evaluate projects, we'll get more into those, how we'll compare between two. If we have 2 projects that are both in conservation opportunity areas, the one that has a broader impact is the one that will rank higher.
Yeah, I feel that of right now, it seems we're moving very much with alignment, but we don't really have quite of a clear picture of what the impact is. And I think it would be useful for us to see, because ultimately what we want to do is optimize how much good we can do with what's given to us. And so I think that would be interesting, at least for me, to know somehow.
This what you said, Mauricio, this occurred to me, and I would ask someone like Kelly or Tim, who are actively doing this, are actively out there applying for these programs. And with the idea being, this is to help us remember what we're doing, but it's also to inform you. It's like, okay, what are these guys looking for? And I would ask you to look at it from that viewpoint and say, well, yeah, does this tell you kind of the broad picture? This is what these guys are looking for in the broad picture. And then we can get into the specifics, like what we're really going to be grading down the road. So I'd ask those of you that are actively applying to look at it from that lens, through that lens.
Yeah. I mean, it seems to me, if I'm looking at it through an applicant's lens, it does seem pretty broad. I feel like it captures what the intent is. But I think my only concern is, it's funny sitting on this end of it now, it's like, even hearing the discussion where it's like, well, we could weight this or that, or think about this. I mean, it's just the name of the game, but even there was PMEP application round a few years ago, and they had listed the same thing. It was sort of like conservation efforts, restoration, and secondary to that was research. But then we ended up going through the whole thing, and I wrote a research proposal, and they were like, well, we're not really funding research. So on the back end, it kind of came around to like, well, that's not really our priority. And I kind of felt like, oh, I wish you would have just said that's not it, because I wouldn't have, ran all the traps to make it happen. But to me, I feel like that even when we're talking about scoring it, that it's not veering too far off from what these ideas are here. So I don't feel like it betrays what it's saying.
Well, keep us
I'm with
honest.
Mark. It's just, yeah.
Keep
I
us
will.
honest on
I
that,
will.
Kelly.
Yeah,
I will. You'll have to watch out.
I would say the same thing, just clear direction for who's applying, if that's a bullet point list. And I'm going to throw out this idea too, is if we're talking about doing 2 different cycles a year, give or take, we could do a cycle focused on one topic and another cycle focused on a different topic. So just to kind of be a little more focused each cycle.
That's a great idea, Tim. And other folks like OWEB's taken that route as well, but it does allow us to have to not also be thinking about the division of those and who we're funding as well.
I think if we were going to embark on that, we would want to be able to give people a far enough heads up. Like it wouldn't be for this round, but we would say, okay, the next 2 rounds, it's like, okay, the first one would be, we would really prioritize habitat, or the second one would be recreation or something like that. We would have to talk that out and then get the word out pretty early on as to what we were going to do. So I think that's
I feel like if we did that, we'd need more rounds, because only giving people one time a year to apply is pretty limiting. And also, I want to make sure we are addressing a problem that really needs to be fixed. It seems like we had some good projects in all of the categories that we have laid out in this round. And I'm just wondering whether making tighter boxes about things is actually gonna help or hurt.
Thanks, Jane. You always you have a consistent message.
On the other side of help or hurt, I would also say as other organizations have really started to look at this funding source, more and more are applying. So I think just kind of getting a little bit more strict to just kind of focus down to where we're not getting 60 plus applicants to go through every cycle. That's just my 2 cents on it.
Yeah, we do want to be specific too, because, as possible, because you don't want people to go through a whole lot of effort to do an application that's not really in the ballpark for us. But I feel pretty good about what these things say in terms of a broader direction.
Okay, does that mean you want me to leave this and scroll down? Sorry, Mark.
I was gonna say, I think they look fine. I think Tim makes a good observation that in the next RFP with grants up to $50,000, we're gonna attract a lot more interest. And I think that's good, but I sort of lean a little bit with Jane with only 1 or 2 funding opportunities a year and a relatively new track record of putting out opportunities. I think I'd want to be careful on how we sort of narrowed it if we did.
I think that I put hearing what I heard, I think all it sounds good. What we could do, depending on our money, our funding availability, and again, remember, we do have the Fishhawk Lake funding. Let's say something came up that we really said, oh my gosh, this is really key. We can react to that and could have a third funding round in addition to. It's like, oh, this is a really important issue. I mean, I'm not proposing that we do that, but that's out there. That's out there as a way that we could be much more focused. And we do have that opportunity. Why don't we move on to the next part?
And I'll note that Kaylin just put some bullets in the chat box about this.
You know, Tim had some really good thoughts about recreation, and I thought some really good insight into how that had impacted even the Park Service and how they framed their programs having to do with recreation. Tim, you want to expand on
jump
that
in
a little
here.
bit?
Yeah. So I emailed just for transparency, Carl and a few others, just kind of some thoughts I had on this. So I'm a true believer that recreation opportunities help build conservation advocates, and that's what excites me about this committee right off the bat. But I'll just kind of read right through the email that I sent to a few folks. Make it mandatory or an option that they have recreation opportunities into conservation grants, and examples of that would be like site visits, new recreation opportunities, education presentations to public, signage. So the conservation aspect, they could help when the recreationists are there, they could learn more about what's going on. And then on the recreation grants that address Oregon conservation species in an area and create a plan not to affect their habitat, and lead education recreation activities to educate others about these species in an area. It kind of helps build the two bridges between the viewpoints. It's this example, this theory of conservation and recreation going hand in hand. It's the foundations of me even starting my own organization. It's how many people get involved in conservation is through recreation opportunities. And then I guess the one last thing is we are all seeing the impacts of areas being overran with recreation. So I think, if we could figure out ways to put in pieces to the conservation grants to help alleviate other areas, build new opportunities. If that makes sense. I know it's kind of rambling in a few different directions there.
No, Tim, I've thought a lot about what you sent out, and I appreciated you doing that. And you bring up some good points. I think it is difficult to figure out how to get the two together. There's some that are perfect, that really do. It's conservation and recreation. And in fact, I would say I'm really happy myself that even though it was the last one on the list, that East Moraine project, I thought that addressed all of the things that are on this page right here, but it's still ranked pretty low. And I think we have to figure out how. I think that project, given our priorities, should have ranked higher. It's a really unique habitat. It's it's like the most perfect example of a moraine in Oregon. It's getting overpopulated there. There's growth that's happening, and the whole purpose of the grant was to figure out what the carrying capacity of that habitat would be, so they could carry capacity for recreation. So they could design appropriate recreation on that site. So they're going to engage people. They're not going to exclude people, but the whole purpose was to figure out how to do that in a appropriate way. So again, a great project that was the bottom one on our list. So I think we're missing some of that on the better recreation pieces. recreation projects that we need to think about, not necessarily. I think, again, this outlines things pretty well. But it's more how we end up scoring them, how we value them. And your suggestions, I think, can help us with that.
Yeah, I mean, we've been at this for a few years now, and can't even keep track of how many cycles we've gone through. And I'm just ballparking, winging a number here, but it seems like, over 75% of our grants that have gone out have been, or probably higher than that even, have been fully wildlife conservation based. And if we just think of our name of conservation and recreation, we need to figure out how to tie that together.
I think that's a valid suggestion. But once again, I feel pretty good myself and would want to have anybody comment on this. Again, admittedly broad, but it does give people a sense of what we're looking for. Any other comments on this?
Any comments on how these align with the priorities that Kaylin talked about at the October meeting? And he put those in the chat and I can read them out again, but outdoor equity programs benefiting or led by traditionally underserved communities and groups, organizational capacity, planning, engagement, and collaboratives, maintenance, recreation sites with clear connections to the conservation strategy, and statewide priorities, alignment with established goals in the SCORP. Are there things from that we would want to pull into this expenditure framework?
So I would just offer briefly that from my perspective, the one of those sort of suggestions or considerations that I don't see reflected is around organizational capacity specifically. And I passed that on because I was asked to sort of find the niches between existing grant programs, right? The recreation grant programs that exist do a pretty good job on things like land acquisition and new recreation infrastructure development, but consistently we receive feedback around the need for more sort of ongoing organizational capacity support, particularly for those small organizations. But the other pieces I see pretty well reflected, except I'd love to just recommend again some way to weave in the statewide comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, which is this guiding document updated every 5 years that really is reflective of Oregonians' perspectives on the outdoors, because it is a valid population sample of who gets outside, what they do, what they'd like to see more of, etc. So overall, though, I think it looks very good.
I'm very supportive of what Kaylin just shared, and I think partially because some of those organizations that are trying to specifically work in bringing those underrepresented communities to partake in the outdoors ecosystem, that is one of the biggest struggles they are. Clearly, some of the barriers that keep some folks from even applying or considering applying is the infrastructure and expertise necessary to even get into the pipeline, into the process. And so if there are ways in which we could provide equity in that aspect, just growth opportunities, capacity building grants, things that will just get them on par, so that we are at the same as we are, trying to get to the higher goals. We're also providing foundational opportunities for those organizations to get to where they need to be in order to be more active participants of all the goals that we're trying to achieve together and the shared outcomes. So I would love to see something along those lines as well.
Davia, did you just added those down, those lower ones, did you? Or
So what I just did is copy those bullet points from Kaylin's chat
Oh.
message.
Okay.
And then I just added this right here, which is from that message, to try to capture some of that capacity of underserved communities and groups that do this kind of work.
And I think Kelly, you had a word, but somehow, even though you were unmuted, we couldn't hear you. Yeah, just FYI.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. It dropped my call somewhere in between, so I think you have to hit the *6 and, you got to do the obstacle course. I was just saying 100%, Mauricio and Callan, both of you guys are speaking directly to me with my heart. Those are the monies that are so hard for organizations to even get, which is totally the grout and the glue that makes us all go. So everybody wants a product or a thing or an endpoint, but nobody wants to pay for time or the collaboration or connecting partnerships. And that's really what makes a really strong organization. So I think including that intentional language is going to be necessary. Thank you.
And one of the options, we could add the word capacity in this one here, research planning or capacity.
Yeah, I think specifically calling out capacity would be really good. Of course, you're going to get some more applications. Nobody wants to talk capacity.
I'd like to, before we leave this, I'd like to point out something, because we have to look at our track record and sort of our outcomes and learn from them. And one, looking at this, there was a project proposed to us that ODF&W staff actually thought was high priority and that it was going to reach its goals and was not pure, but was very recreationally directed. That was the Bull Gap Jump Line, which is as I recall, a mountain bike trail basically. But they were going to do a bunch of rehabilitation, so it wasn't impacting habitat. And that particular project was third from last. And I think that's was a good project. And so I don't think we're capturing, we haven't quite figured out this recreation piece yet. And there could have been some other issues. I brought that up. It's dangerous to bring up specifics, but that's a specific project that I think in the perfect world might have ranked higher, especially given the comments from ODF&W. So we do have to really think about how to reflect that, to reflect these goals when we go to our scoring. And I think that might be what's next. We're getting close.
If you don't mind, I'll just add in a quick piece. I've got to know some ODF&W staff here locally, and they've talked a lot about the recreation piece as well, even with me personally. So
yeah, I think particularly in Eastern Oregon, the rise in recreation interest and recreation participation is a huge concern from a conservation standpoint for a lot of our biologists.
yeah.
So this is, I think what Davia's got here, we had discussed this. This is kind of where we get down to our review criteria. We have these already with our 6 categories. We have, one thing we have is that one area where you can say yes or no, or high, medium, low. Those haven't really been that useful. We might, but it's there's some extra ones in here from the 6 that we have already used. And I think we need to look at these and vet them and see if that fits. We can come up with the numbers and how much we're going to ascribe to each of these down the road between now and when we actually do the assessment. But to get this RFP out, we need to be able to tell the people applying, we're really going to be looking at these things. So some of these are the same ones we've had, some of them are additional, and I'd like to hear any other suggestions. So Davi, you want to go through these? I know that you added a couple, but you want to just run through them?
Sure. The first one is unchanged, that the project outcomes align with the OCRAC program priorities, which we just tweaked a little bit in the framework, and are consistent with the Oregon Conservation Strategy. The second is clarity of the proposal, that's well presented, organized, and has clear deliverables. The third is one that I've added based on our conversation at the last meeting, which is impact of the proposed actions, and that the committee is looking for projects that maximize, I'm on the wrong one there, that have a high impact on participating individuals or the target species or habitat. An example there, on some of the outdoor equity projects, the committee in the past has been more interested in projects that maybe have 12 participants for a week or a month versus a video that would possibly hit 100,000 people for a minute. The committee has focused more on the former of that. And so this is trying to capture that in terms of high impact on participating individuals, and then high impact on target species or habitat. I think that could, on habitat, get to an acreage. It's a very simple metric there. On species, it could get to, the amount of information, or there's different ways that we could look at that, but trying to add that. One of the things I heard earlier is scale. And so we could add the word here, impact or scale. I think it's getting at a similar concept. So that's a brand new one. We should talk about that. The next one I added is cost efficiency of the proposed action, which is another thing that came up at our last meeting that we hadn't been considering in our previous criteria, but we did notice it where some outdoor equity projects, for example, were doing something for 25 students and some for 10, and they were costing the same. And so the ability for the committee to say this one is more cost efficient is added here. And then the rest are straight from our existing framework. So the timeliness and having necessary approvals in place, appropriate partnership and demonstration of partner investment, measurability, and outdoor equity. This second to last one, I'm not sure why we have it in this order, and we can clean that up, is not a scored criteria, but it's one that we've had in here so that you would have the ability to say, okay, we're going to take the top 10 projects and then realize those are all in the Willamette Valley, for example, and maybe skip a few of those to add some Eastern Oregon ones. So just giving the committee that sort of subjective ability to look at trying to be diverse in the suite of projects that are selected. And then there's the other two unscored ones about the proven track record of the applicant and the integration and intersectionality between conservation and recreation. And so the proposal here is to add 2 criteria to the existing framework.
I would ask Mark Stern for his thoughts on how we worded the third one.
And is the third one now intended to be how we describe what's been column B when we give it that score in the scoring template on, how well it supports OCS?
No, that's not the way I've seen that. That would still be this first one. And I've seen this more as, looking at 2 projects that are doing similar work. If one is more acres or one's affecting more people, that would try to get at that idea.
So it'd be an additional criteria, or?
Correct.
Yeah,
Well, I think it's the right thing to think about. I still, it could be, if you want to get a 6 in terms of how you support the OCS, it would be a project that's a strategy species connected to an important area that proposes an action at scale. Is that how I might think about it? But I thought I heard you, Davia, say maybe that's how we used to differentiate between 2 projects that are otherwise similar. I'm not clear exactly where.
That's how I was thinking about it. certainly. The other thing to consider is that, we've called these criteria here, but really for the applicant, this is what the committee is going to look at on your proposal. And so we could have these laid out this way, but then when it comes to the actual scoring that you do, it could be folded in somehow.
Yeah, we could either add these as a separate scoring column, or it could be adding points or taking away points based on these. But I'd like to, Mark, when you told me about your thoughts on this, I understood what you're saying, but I'm not sure we captured what you were saying. I think, could you maybe tell the committee what?
I think it does. It's really just sort of that the project's going to have an impact at scale, or it's going to leverage activities at scale. To me, the Modus is a good example of a technology that's potentially going to encourage additional projects. It's not for one specific project. It's going to help, track movement of migratory birds primarily. So to me, that's sort of a big swing with a big impact, as opposed to the other example I gave at the other end of, one bat box for one bat somewhere doesn't have the same impact of scale. It doesn't have the same reach, I think, is what I'm trying to get at.
If I may, I feel like these would be the places in which would be most helpful to have either the ODFW staff or other experts weigh in, because for a lot of us, we don't know how much these GPS trackers really cost and what would be a good price for them, or what would be a good range for them to be. So to a certain degree, if the intention, or if it's just that they happen to be really great project writers, but the actual project itself and the outcomes may not necessarily have the kind of impact that we're hoping or we're holding as the standard for the remaining projects that are being scored. So maybe that's something that that having that extra amount of time that we were talking about earlier, so that we come in a little bit better equipped to understand what is it that we're seeing, for those of us who do not have the expertise or the background to really determine what we're looking at. I think that may be something that could bring clarity to those three new. So I see it on criteria number 3, 4, and measurability. So impact or scale, cost efficiency, and measurability.
Risha, I personally like that idea. I mean, again, to have professional staff tell you, yes, this is going to have a big impact, is in many ways more valuable than me thinking of it. So that, Davia, that could be added to the questions that we asked the staff. And then we would have that feedback when we ranked them. But again, we still could have, again, to have that demonstrated, you could have a column that you could add a point or take away a point or give 0 points, just based on the fact that it's going to be a big, high impact project. I don't think we would necessarily have to give it an entire 6-point ranking, but it could really make a difference in terms of the final score. But again, I think at this stage, we're just trying to identify those things to tell our applicants what we're looking at, and we can fine tune how exactly we actuate that in the coming meetings.
I think on a different topic, I think one thing that I found helpful in the proposals is some have a short budget and some don't. So I don't know if that falls under clarity of proposal or how the funds are used, cost efficiency, but something I think we'll get more similar information. It'll be easier to compare apples to apples if we ask them to provide a brief budget. Because some do and some don't, but I think it'd be helpful to have one.
What if we just added that into the clarity of the proposal and say something about the budget?
Yeah, that'd be great.
Like clear budget, yeah. And not to do, I'm going to digress anyway, but because it made me think of it. The other thing that came up in some of the discussions was, I got a little bit of heartburn looking at the overhead some of these projects charged. And I think we've got a couple of ways to deal with that. We could put a limit on, say, okay, we're only going to pay X% overhead. I think one of them was 35%. And I think that's what a lot of the universities automatically charge. We can either use that criteria to grade the projects, or we can just say, we don't want to pay more than X. I think we should have something about that. And so I'd throw that out there for your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also for supporting admin, but not always necessarily up to like the 40% as well. That gives me heartburn too. And sometimes if you say up to 10%, some people don't have a 10%, but then you can go ahead and charge them 10% anyway, and then you make a little more off the top. But a lot of people have a federally negotiated rate as well. So I don't know, what's the right number. I don't want to necessarily say like cap it at 20, because then if people want to say up to 20, then they're still collecting this money that they may not necessarily need for that piece. Like we're putting more out than we're expecting to. So I'm trying to noodle on what's the right number, unless it's just 10% or your federal rate. But
Kelly, does anyone speak to that in applications that you've seen? Do they say?
Oh yeah, yeah. Most applications are 10%, which I don't always love, but I love it for our nonprofit, but our district has 14.85 is ours. So then we lose money on admin, and I have to go out and fundraise to get that other 4%. So yeah.
Well, being on the board of a couple of nonprofits, I'm totally into admin. I totally understand that. But there's a level, I guess, where I started thinking, wait a minute, that's a lot of money. I wish we were getting that. And I think it was somewhere around like 25% is like high, but not terrible. 35% is like, whoa, that's a lot. So I don't know that we have to decide that today, but I'd like for everyone to think about that maybe. And we can say that that's going to be a consideration. Is administrative overhead is a consideration or something, but we don't have to come up with a hard number, but let's think about that and see what people come up with between now and the next month or two.
Hey, Kelly or anybody else, do you know what OWEB allows for indirect cost rate?
They allow up to 10%, or if you have a federally negotiated rate, they will accept that. So you have to gone through an indirect process with the government and gotten certified, and then you can turn that in, and that can be whatever.
Kelly, what does that run usually, a federally one? Is it like, is there an average?
To like go through that process? No,
what they come up with.
Oh, it's all depends on what's your numerator and denominator, but they really do span. I would say most people's federally negotiated rates are probably between like 12 and 16 to 18, somewhere in there. But I mean, it really depends on, what you're tucking into your bottom line and those kind of things. So it's a really crazy big process.
Yeah. Okay, well that's good. Maybe 20%, not 25. Again, let's think about that and maybe figure out how we can incorporate that without impairing our applicants. That would be under the cost efficiency one. You could maximize use of funds to achieve stated outcomes and minimize overhead, not putting a limit on it. But that might be a place to mention that.
Yeah, and I think Mauricio's right. It seems to me like, you can see places where it's unreasonable.
Yeah, like maybe with appropriate overhead, consider admin overhead costs. Yes, yeah, exactly. Put something like that in there. That was where you'd cover that. Okay, any other thoughts on these or other ideas, other things that we might want to add that you felt like and again, in subsequent meetings, we can, like, for instance, the last one, integration, intersectionality between conservation and recreation, we can decide how we might elevate that or not. But we just have to have it in there. We can figure that out later. But as long as we're comfortable with these criteria, this is what we would put out to the applicants.
Carl, I've been thinking about the partnership piece.
Okay.
I'm not really sure that it doesn't say it. I think it does. It's just that some people do a better job at describing it than others. But there's some applications have a very clear and understandable version of who's doing what and what the commitments are. And then other ones just sort of wave sort of a partnership sheen over it and say, we're going to be working with a lot of people, but they don't really talk about any specifics. And a lot of times in grant applications, you have to show a commitment from the partners and a letter, and maybe we don't want to get into all that, but it's helpful. So I'm not sure if there's anything we can do to strengthen sort of the, give us a real assessment of partnerships. And particularly, I was looking at a few ODF and W projects. They had some little element of partnership. I wondered if they could have been stronger. Some other agency projects, just wondering if they really thought about it very much, or they just sort of said, oh yeah, we're going to have a bunch of partners. But just
well, that's actually, that partnership one is a fairly important one. I mean, it's a whole column with 6 points. And so if they're not doing, it's going to hurt them to not flesh that out.
Right. So I think it may be there already because it's a rated thing, but just to think about that a little bit on how convincing is their partnership story.
Yeah.
And
Maybe
it's so important to develop capacity, to keep expanding our collaborative capacity. Really working with partners is a great way to do it. And it's uncomfortable, particularly for a lot of agencies.
Do you think we should change what we've said, or is that strong enough?
I think it's there. I think I don't really know how to address it any better. It says it clearly. It's just that it shows up in different ways on the applications.
Yeah. Some people don't emphasize it at all.
Yeah.
It could be that we tweak the application itself to be more clear that what we're asking. Okay, we've got a little less than 20 minutes left to roll through this. I'm going to go to the next section, which is unchanged from our previous versions, just pasted in. Trying to get at the idea that you are looking at a large variety of applications and you're going to use your scores and the criteria to come up with a ranked list, and that you definitely are looking at ending up with a suite of projects that hit a diverse geography, hit a diverse taxonomy, diverse representation of those conservation and recreation priorities, diverse partners included, and looking at projects that have an outdoor equity lens or not. And so this is straight from our original documents from 2 years ago. And so it applied when the motivation for the first round of projects was demonstrate what the OCRF can do. And there was that desire to hit a broad suite of projects.
I think this is an important piece because we looked at this when we all sat down and looked at the list of programs, projects. It was pretty good. We hit it pretty well. We had a lot of different species, and including species, we had a lot of songbird projects, which we have not had. We had reptile, amphibian. We really had a nice, I thought, mix, but there may be situations in the future where it isn't going to be so simple as to just draw the line somewhere. We may be saying, wait a minute, this is the only project that addressed X. Or if we really keep having no projects at all in certain, I think we still didn't get one in the Columbia Plateau. You know, we may have to pick a Columbia Plateau project just to make sure we have some geographic diversity. So this allows us, and it's out there, it's not going to be arbitrary. We may not just be so simple as drawing a line. I think this one just happened to allow us to do that.
And this allowed you to add the People of Color Outdoors project to this current round.
Any comments on that?
I think it works.
Great.
Okay, our monitoring section, which we're going to make sure that the new OCRF coordinator, when they come in soon, will have this as among task number 1 to flush this section out.
And to that end, I think you all saw on our agenda, Davia followed up on some recommendations, and we're going to have some reports from some of our projects, which I'm really interested to hear.
The outdoor equity statement of purpose, that's I just fixed some typos we had in there. All right. So this next section of the document gets into actual grant process. You know, earlier up, we committed to 2 cycles per year. And so I sort of tried to play that out for us on a timeline based on how things have gone for us in the past, and put out there that it takes about 5 months from when an application is, from the application deadline to when we're able to make those grants. And then the first application would open in January and have those available. The commission doesn't always meet in July, so it would probably be planning for August most years. And then the second opening in July and having the commission look at those in January. So this second one pretty much mirrors the process we did in 2020 and the process in 2021. And so this one is adding the new one. And we can open that in December this time around. But just giving us room to open it in January if we need to.
Davia, can you explain to me how this meshes with the biennium?
Yes, the biennium starts on July 1st of every odd number year.
So would that mean for our second round will be at the end of the biennium from here? Like our second one coming up, you know, not.
Yes, that is a good point, Carl, that we would be coming up against the biennium. So if we take this schedule, we would have 2 more opportunities this biennium, and the third one would be at the very start of the next biennium. So we would need to spend all of our general fund in the next 2. And so we might want to tweak this one a little sooner. It's a good point.
Because wouldn't we have to have the commission approve it before the end of the biennium?
We need to spend the money this biennium. And so really the application period in early 2023 is not going to be general fund. We need to spend the general fund before that. And so we shouldn't really be running into an issue there. in
Okay,
terms of money
okay.
management.
So Darby, a question, does it have to be spent or it has to be allocated?
It has to be out
Right.
the door.
I'm sorry,
It has to be spent.
it has to be spent. Okay, huh?
Wow, so that means we've got to spend that
Oh,
much.
I heard Davia say obligated. Isn't that what you meant or no? No, you mean,
I mean,
Okay.
spent.
Got
And we internally are working on the mechanics of that so that every OCRF expenditure is going to be general fund until we run out of the general fund. So we are feeling comfortable that we're not going to run into trouble there.
Okay.
But I think there is
Okay,
a
so-
legitimate question. Would you want the third round this biennium to be obligated this biennium? And that would be June, meeting for June.
So that brings up another point, is that means, I still, despite Kelly's questions about whether we're going to raise $1 million or not, I do think we will. What it means is we are going to have to not only raise $1 million, we're going to have to do it by the end of the second from here solicitation. So we have got to really fire it up to, so that's the craziness of the way the legislature set this up. They're making us raise $1 million and we don't even have a full biennium to do it because we have to spend it before the biennium's over. So we're going to talk a little bit about that in a minute, but we just need to make sure that this timeline is going to work for that. But I guess it will if we're not going to be spending general fund dollars.
Well, and I'll jump in, but maybe it's better for an offline conversation, but I think that there's an opportunity there with the Fishhawk Lake where we could use that fund to immediately grab the general fund to make sure that that's spent. So
That's true. Very true.
yeah,
Very
so we
true.
could probably work something out there.
Yeah,
It's workable, I think.
great point.
I just had a quick function question since we're talking about this money and allocated or spent so from an applicant viewpoint, is this money like when somebody gets their grant, do you just mail them a $20,000 check or is it like a reimbursement? Because that's what I'm thinking is if you're like the money needs to be out the door, or does the grantee actually have to spend the money by the end of the biennium? Because that becomes like super fast crunch time when you start talking the second year of the biennium.
Generally, we do the projects as reimbursements, sort of the latter, but we have the ability to send a check. Our accounts office doesn't love that because it's higher risk for us, of course, but we can do
I'm
that.
sure.
And so if we reach a crunch, we can do that.
So, but if there is reimbursements, then that is technically the project has to be done because they need to be done in order to ask you the money spent and ask for reimbursement. That's tight.
Yes, but I think we're comfortable with our accounting here at ODF&W that we're using the general fund first. And so that we can have a project go beyond the biennium because we have the non-general fund funds to cover that.
as a footnote in the next legislative session, the next biennium, when it comes up again, we might think about if there's a way to get a longer timeline on sort of when the dollars actually have to be spent, because I think OWEB and Department of Forestry, some of the other state agencies have a little more latitude with general fund dollars. Because kind of to Kelly's point, it's really hard. It's one thing to get the money obligated. It's another one to have an entity actually do the project work and spend the money. That's a crunch.
Davi, we just got a few more minutes, or can we move on to the, there we go, this one. Okay, so what we're going to do is we've got this framework and we're going to try to approve this today, but this is a piece of it that I think is really important for us. This is all about the restricted donations that we have discussed and how we if it's greater than $10,000, we will match 30% of that to the given project, freeing up 70% to us. This is already pretty well codified. Davia changed some wording here because I think it's clear that we're going to have to continue with this program to hit the $1 million. I don't think there's any other way to do it. And it's really generated some wonderful opportunities. I can't help but think of Jane Hartline's incredible contribution that she made last year to this program. The funding we've gotten for Forest Park. There are several more out there that I think will end up qualifying for this. So this, what I'd like to do here, there have been voiced some very reasonable concerns about transparency and how we go about this. So we have some proposals in that regard. A lot of the stuff is already codified as you see here. Is it in the next section, Davia, where you had those changes? Yes. So I'm going to go through this, and if y'all listen carefully and see if this fits with a framework that is fair and transparent and works. You know, we were kind of scrambling in that last biennium, and it was sort of like I would hear about a project and someone would call me and we would make it work. But I'd like for it to be a bit more objective. And so we have lined out here. So how could you be considered for this? And certainly the preferred way is we have a project that has already been approved. And as you noticed in the wording that Davia wrote up for that motion, we can any of those projects can raise more money through and use our match as an incentive for donors and route that through the OCRF. So that is certainly a great way to do it. However, there are many projects that don't quite fit the timeline of that application, and for other reasons, it's better to do it in a different manner. And so this is an attempt to figure out a way to onboard those projects. So we have the subcommittee, the advisory committee that reviews and scores these projects. We have that lined out, and we've already done that. That part is already codified, and how that committee reviews them and brings them to the committee is already there. The part that wasn't there is how do we get that to the committee? And is that further down, Davia, in this? Okay, so maybe it's somewhere. Okay, there, it's right there above. The way, and I talked to Davia and Mauricio about this. I think we need to keep this program going, but the way that a project gets to the finish line is, first of all, any committee member has the opportunity and ability to bring a potential project to the subcommittee. So that's a kind of a new feature, or one that we hadn't emphasized, but any committee member can bring a possible project to the subcommittee. The subcommittee would then review the project, not to see, okay, so this is a little different than the way I had.
So Carl, this is our existing process.
Oh, the existing one.
Yeah,
Okay.
and so if you want to propose something new, now's the moment.
Yeah, I do want to propose something new. And do you have that? You showed me a copy of that. Oh, I thought
This is what I sent you earlier that was already in here. The proposal from Carl, I think, would be to have, before a committee member brings a project to the subcommittee, they would bring sort of a concept to the full committee. And I can grab Carl's language for that.
Well, no, the way I would see it is that you can bring a project to the subcommittee, but the subcommittee has to decide if that's an appropriate project. It's not a full application. it's like, you have I thought I saw a version that was my proposal, Davia, maybe not.
Here's your proposal, Carl.
Okay.
There it is.
So this is yeah. Oh man, I'm sorry. I'm complicating this a bit. But let me just say, I decided to name this the Select Project Subcommittee just so that we had a name. And this whole thing is a way to onboard projects. So the Select Project Committee is already formed. The process for vetting the projects is already codified, as you saw in our framework. So the way I would like to see this go is any committee member has the right to bring a project they feel is appropriate to the subcommittee for consideration. And what warrants a project appropriate, and that is consistent with our stated goals and objectives that we've gone through. The projects that due to timing or other factors are not able to access our usual solicitation process, and where there's a considerable opportunity to incentivize large donations using our state match. Well, the committee members bringing this to the subcommittee should provide an overview of the project, as well as a summary of how that fits the above criteria. And then the subcommittee is going to decide, not the person bringing it to the committee, not even to ask for an application. Rather than make the entity go through the whole application process, the subcommittee may say, well, this doesn't really fit. This isn't really quite what we want. But if they say, yeah, this fits, this is great, then the subcommittee invites the applicant. Not me, not one of us, but the subcommittee. So we've had a way to vet these projects that's somewhat objective and it's transparent. And then once that happens, and if such an application is obtained, then we just follow the process that's already in the, it's already outlined. So again, I did this in a convoluted way, which I seem to be doing today. But the purpose of this is to have a transparent way to onboard these projects and a fair way, so any of us can bring it. But there has to be some vetting, and the subcommittee will be the one that decides if we're going to go even to look at the application. So that's the way I saw it. And I'm certainly open to other ways to do it. But this has been too good of a program to not go with or to just stop. I certainly would prefer to do this with the projects we've already vetted, but I know that other ones are going to come up. So with that, I'd love to hear any comments on my convoluted presentation.
I think it looks pretty good, Carl. I think on number 3, I feel like out of that one, probably C is an important one, because there could be plenty of applications that say, oh, I just didn't, I didn't make your round, that didn't get it. But I feel like we either need to highlight something about the larger donations, or we say that, like, for consideration shall include each of these or all of the following or something like that.
Yeah, that's implicit. Yeah, that's great thought. That's implicit in this.
Overall, though, I do like the idea of it, and I think it really does make it more transparent. Others, other than being like, "Hey, Carl gave me a call, and we said this project's good. Let's do it." So
yeah.
Even though we know that's all this stuff happens, this really does set it up for clarity for folks. And then there's a process. That's nice.
Chris Hager, I sent you a copy of this because you said you wanted something in writing. So there you go. What do you think?
No, I appreciate it. And sorry, everybody, for being late. I'm sure Carl or give you guys an update, but I just started a new job. So, and it turned out that today basically was my first day. But yeah, no, I think it looks good. I was able to briefly look over it when you sent it over this morning. And I think this is a great step forward in the right direction. just kind of reiterating what, Kelly brought up of, kind of getting rid of the whole, give us a call and figure it out. And I think this makes this more streamlined. So I like it.
Great. Marat, you're on that subcommittee. What do you think?
I like it. We've talked about it, and I think it makes sense.
Mark Stern?
Yeah, I was just saying, I think it works. It codifies what we're doing and puts it in writing. So I think it's a good thing.
Okay, great. Well, thank you.
And clarifying question. A lot of this is sort of work of the subcommittee. Is the only time the full committee looks at it once there's already a proposal and a subcommittee recommendation? And so just as an alternative, it could come to the advisory committee as a concept and then get sent to the subcommittee. Just clarifying.
I'd rather have the subcommittee be the one that decides whether it's appropriate project or not. And then what'll happen is the subcommittee is the one that does the inviting. So they get the application. They then review the application, and if they think it's appropriate, we'll make a recommendation to the full committee. And I put a name on it, and if anyone has a better name, that's fine. I think it's the Select Project Program and the Select Project Subcommittee, rather than I think there was a different name for it, was the Advisory Committee. This is this is Marat, Mark Stern, Chris Hager, and myself is the Select Project Subcommittee. So at least we got a name for it.
Are you saying all of those people are select?
Yeah, exactly.
Had to have a little humor in there.
Yeah. Believe me, I thought of a lot of different words, but select came out to be the one. No, I'm sorry, not Select Project Subcommittee. I'm sorry. It's not this, that was one of my selections. It's the Strategic Project Subcommittee. I forgot to change that. That's a typo. So it's not the Select, it's the Strategic Project Program. I changed the name about 3 times. And so if anyone has a better name, I ended on Strategic Project Program. So that's a typo in there. Well, if everyone's okay with that, then Davia, do we need to vote that in, and do we need to vote in the changes on the framework?
We do not need a vote. Sorry, I now have 1 million screens open. It's getting confusing. We don't need a vote. I was just trying to capture the full process that you all just talked about. And so I will put that up right now. And so you guys can say, yes, this is what I meant. And then I'll merge Carl's proposal with the framework for the final version. And we don't need a vote on the framework, just sort of a go ahead. And what'll happen next is I'll accept these track changes and send you a final version to turn into the RFP. Okay, so this is similar to Carl's proposal, but I tried to get the whole process here. So any committee member finds a project and a project proponent, they can bring that idea to the Strategic Project Subcommittee. That subcommittee will consider those 3 things that were in Carl's document. If those 3 things apply and the subcommittee wants to carry on, they will invite a full proposal. And then the subcommittee will consider and score that full proposal. And these criteria were from our existing process. And based on that, the subcommittee will make a recommendation to the full committee. The full committee will vote on that, and then it'll go to the commission.
Man, Dov, you did that quick. That's
Lots
pretty
of
good.
copying and pasting.
That's quick.
Okay, I will.
Man,
interview
this
and
this
get it
person coming to replace you had better be good. God, you're just making my life so much easier. All right, well, okay, so is that clear to everybody? Is everyone okay with that? And okay with the changes we made to the framework? And if so, we can move ahead with getting out an RFP and indicating those criteria that we're looking at and how we're going to rank, or not rank them, but with our priorities that we have. And then between now and then, we can come up with we can discuss the exact way we're going to do it. But this gets it out the door, gets them some information. And let me, so if we're okay with that, there's one last piece of, or one consideration to make right now. And that is, we had talked last time, and I'm just throwing it out there again, to make our maximum ask $50,000 for this round. And I think it's safe to say that that total amount we're going to have is 600,000 to 700,000. And does people still feel that's an appropriate number? And once again, I would direct that question in part to Kelly and Tim. Like, is that like an incentive? Does that make an incentive for you to apply, or is that like a deterrent to apply if you have a smaller project? Or how does that number resonate with everybody? Does it still resonate with everyone?
Mark, do you have your hand up?
Yes, but it's not related to that. It's
Go ahead, Mark.
Oh,
it's after that. Not related to this, Carl.
Okay. So
no, I was just going to say, I'm thinking about it. Now I'm flopping back over to this side. It's like, ooh, only 600,000 if you're 50,000 a pop. I mean, there's probably a lot of people that are going to apply up to that amount. That's what, 12 projects? Maybe that we would fund. But I would say that honestly, I don't know, 50 might be high. I mean, there are a lot of projects that are going to run right up against that, but I also feel like you don't want to ticky-tack a project to death. It's really hard to like go after, 7 different grants to complete one project. But I don't feel like $20,000 is small money. 30,000, you could, 40,000 might be a good cap. 50 just feels, but now I'm not speaking from my applicant side. I'm speaking from this side.
well,
I just want to fund more.
I got to say, I did those numbers, and 50,000, if everyone asked for it, would be 12 projects. And maybe we want to do that, but maybe not. I would hope. I guess my worry is if we have a $50,000 max, then people that have a $6,000 project aren't going to apply for it. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't feel that way. I mean, when I see projects, I would apply any amount up to that, like whatever you need. I actually appreciated in this round that we had some of them that only applied for, $6,000 or $10,000. To me, that shows also a really cost-efficient organization, and they're like, this is all I need, so this is what I'll apply for.
Mhm.
Yeah, I like that. I don't want to discourage that. I really like we had some $10,000 projects. Mark Stern, you've been in that world some. What do you think about that, or is it relevant?
Well, I kind of wear the same hat Kelly does as the applicant. You like seeing that $50,000 thing because you're not chasing as many different pots of money to get what you need to do the work. I think on the other side of it, I guess I'm really thinking also, Davi, if some of this money in theory is supposed to be spent by June of 23, the bigger the chunk, the less likely, or the more you can fill in the blank there. It's a little bit harder to see how that's going to happen exactly, but, and then I think 12 projects seems kind of limiting in some ways, but,
I know,
so
I
I'm
know.
kind of, if it was 30,000, then there'd be 20 projects, and I think 30,000 is still enough to attract interest. Yeah, so I'm kind of meandering over the board there.
Yeah. Jane, what do you think about, you've been involved in that side of things. What do you think about a appropriate level that we should max out at for this round?
Well, I think we've already told some people 50,000, and I don't really think that precludes people from putting their $5,000 projects in. And I certainly, I'm also would like to see some smaller projects that, show that people are being frugal and they're just asking for what they need. So I think they might score highly, and I don't know that it would discourage people from applying.
Well, it might be interesting to see what happens if we have a $50,000 limit and see what the range is. We may say, oh God, we can't do this anymore because everyone asked for 50. I'm okay with it. We did sort of informally identify 50,000 last time.
I had a question for Davia. One of the things we talked about earlier was that the more money we're giving out, the more vetting you're going to have to do on your end. Is there some kind of a magic number that requires more or less vetting?
Not particularly in this range. I think as you go up, the risk goes up for these kind of projects. But under $100,000 is kind of the number that our contract staff are not too worried. I think one of the things we've talked about too is just the workload. If you do $1 million worth of 10,000 or $1 million worth of $10,000 projects, that's a lot more grant administration workload. And so I think, speaking for the potential new staff person, because it won't be me doing that work for the next round, that's a consideration. And so I like Mauricio's suggestion of having the higher limit, but saying that our average has been 16,000 and maybe just an affirmative statement that smaller projects are welcome. Because then I think from a staff perspective, it would be a more streamlined process if all of them were 50,000 or close to that, because we would be doing fewer projects. But I think giving you all that option and making sure people know that you're interested in smaller ones as well is reasonable at this point.
That's a really nice way a nice compromise to deal with that. I think that's good. And we'll see what happens. We could change. We could say, oh, we got to drop it, or wow, that worked out wonderfully. So I'm okay with that.
I'm sure it will be fine. I think there's a lot of really worthy projects out there that could easily go through $50,000 really quickly. So,
oh yeah, that's for sure. So we can keep it at that. That makes it simpler. And we did say that was the number. Okay, so Davia, are we good?
I think we are ready to go.
All right, wonderful. So dang, we're only a little behind, 4 minutes.
Well, and
Okay.
I have an update that Claire from Greenbelt Land Trust had a computer crash and she is totally out of it. And she asked if we could delay and have her come back in January.
Okay.
I said that would probably be fine with all of you. And so we've got 10 extra minutes for the day, but Laura is in the room for her update.
Okay, great. Well, that is
And Mark has his
actually,
hand up.
we're public comment. We're not on schedule. Do you want to do the public comment at the very end or after?
Carl,
Yeah.
Mark Labhart has been patiently waiting with his hand up. So I
Oh,
wondered
yeah, I'm
before we go
sorry.
do that.
Oh, I apologize. I know we're a little bit behind time, but I would like to say this. I want to thank you all for your due diligence on that previous work. That was really good. And then also thank you for the really good work you did on those applications. I know it's tough making all those tough decisions. I would offer though that when we do when the commission sees like an R&E project, we're able to tell how many projects are funded for restoration and how many projects are funded for enhancement. The same with A&H, access and habitat. We're able to tell how many projects are funded by access and habitat. And I would like to hopefully in the presentation, I don't know if it's Davia or the new Davia, but when you do this presentation before the commission in January, I think it is, if we could have maybe a staff presentation that says, here's how many projects we have funded that are recreation projects, and here's how many projects we've funded that are conservation projects. Because it's important for at least me to see that we're having a balance there. It doesn't have to be exact balance, but I think it's important for, I think that this committee to see that too. What are we funding for recreation, both number of projects and dollars that are going into that. And then also if we could break it out, if possible, by how many projects are research versus on the ground projects. Because I heard a couple of members talk about that. Well, how many projects are we getting on the ground, or how are we doing monitoring or research, those kind of things. And then if we can, because the commission has put a lot of emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion, how many projects that we funded that meet that criteria for diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that we can see as a commission, yep, we're doing exactly what the OCRF has intended to do and with the priorities that we have. So I just put more work on Davia or the new Davia, but I at least I'm going to ask for that for the commission meeting. I think it would be helpful to this group to see that too. So we have, because we're funding a lot of projects right now, and we're going to be funding a lot of projects in the future, and having that in front of us will make it very clear how we're funding those projects. So you okay with that, Carl?
Mark, that's a great suggestion. We should have that anyway. We should, and honestly, I looked through, when I looked through it, I did that filing in my head, but I couldn't tell you exactly what it is. I was very happy with that diversity of projects, but no, that's a really good suggestion for us internally to do that, and certainly be better for the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. That made me think of one particular project, Mark, that I know everyone didn't get to read them, but one of the projects we funded sort of towards the bottom of that list, but not the very bottom. We're building a bridge. OCRF is building a bridge to an island for access. And I'm so happy about that. I'm going to go put my initials in the concrete when they pour it. So we're doing some infrastructure. It's real. It's on the ground, shovel ready work. That's one of my most exciting projects. That's the Pompadour Bluff one. So I'm really happy with that. Okay, so with that, what do you want, Davia, you want to do public comment or have Laura talked with us?
Why don't we go to Laura to respect her schedule here? And if there's members of the public that want to provide comment, send me a message in the chat box and we'll do that next.
Great. Laura, are you out there?
I'm here. Davia, are you going to run the slides? Oh, sorry, my dog is freaking out. One sec.
Sure thing. I'll grab your slides while you chat with the dog.
Are you there, Laura?
I'm here. Yep.
Right. Laura, thank you so much for joining us. We're really interested in hearing about the project. As you may have heard, one of our priorities is to monitor what we funded. And this is just a step in that process to hear back from our applicants and recipients to hear exactly what you're doing. So thank you very much for joining us.
Absolutely. Thanks for inviting me. I'm very excited as to how this project has shaped up over the last year. So I'm excited to present it to you, and I hope you all are as impressed as I feel satisfaction for it. So yeah, my name is Laura Gooderjan. So I am an ecologist with Portland Parks and Recreation for my day job. But a couple of years ago, I decided to go back and get my PhD. So this project was part of my PhD dissertation through the Environmental Sciences and Management School at PSU. And my entire project, I'm going to go into that a little bit more at the end of my presentation, is really around multiple issues around Oregon Native conservation, turtle conservation. This is one small piece of it that made sense, that needed funding. So that's what I'll be presenting to you today. So next slide. So the project need, one of the first things that I worked on over the first year of my PhD was to gather any and all records of native turtle incidents throughout the 7 counties that kind of characterize the lower and middle Willamette watersheds, and make a map. And so, no, don't worry, you're not supposed to see the different colors of the points here, just to get an idea of the distribution in general of where we have had sightings historically. Some of these sightings go back to Lewis and Clark records. Some of these sightings go back to the 1900s. Others go back to much more recent than that. But it became obvious to me that Yamhill County especially has quite a bit of a gap. Most of those dots in Yamhill County are yellow, so they are unknown. We don't know what species folks saw out there. It could have been a tortoise, it could have been a pet, it could have been a native turtle. And so the amount of data lacking in Yamhill County was pretty apparent to me. And then secondly, it's really important to me to work on environmental justice issues and to make sure that that is an intentional part of my entire PhD program. And so one way that I can use my privilege and power is to mentor and provide opportunities for young women, especially young women of color, to be able to get experience in the field biology career path so that they can hopefully consider it as they are going through college and their upperclassmen. So next slide. So I'm sure you all know Northwest pond turtle is pretty critical here in the Pacific Northwest. It ranges all the way down to Baja California, but the Northwest Oregon area is really the primarily the most northern part of its range. There have been some head-started populations in Washington. One of the things that I'm really interested in is at these range extents, how climate change is going to particularly affect the expansion or detraction of ranges. And so this part of Oregon seems to be a really interesting place to do some of this research. The Oregon Conservation Strategy has listed the pond turtle as a conservation species with several limiting factors, a lot of them related to habitat and just better understanding how urbanization, fragmentation, and competition with invasive species might be affecting their populations. And then there's some pretty obvious data gaps just in basic life history information. And then population dynamics, better understanding how they grow, how long they live, and a lot about how hatchlings are able to survive in the environment as well. Next slide. So there were 3 main goals of this project that you all helped me to fund. And the first goal was to magnify partnerships. So in Yamhill County, there are soil and water conservation districts. There are different jurisdictional entities and community groups that are working on conservation issues, but it's primarily a private land county. There's not as much public land as there is here as we get closer to Portland or more of the urban centers. And so I was able to magnify a lot of partnerships through using this funding that you all gave me as seed money for other grants. So I was able to get additional funding from the Oregon Wildlife Institute, Murdoch Foundation, Society for Science STEM Action Grants, and the Oregon Zoo to put together a larger, more robust project that involved hiring 4 paid interns from the Native American Youth and Family Center from Portland, partnering with the Confederated Tribes of the Grand Ronde so that I could do turtle surveys on tribal lands, which was something that hadn't been done before. And then working with underserved youth, primarily foster children from an area of Portland that I'm particularly tied to. Next slide. So the actual project is in 2 parts, as I mentioned before. So there's kind of the basking and the trapping survey piece, and then there's the environmental justice piece. So the basking and trapping surveys, in my application, I promised to survey at least 12 new sites in Yamhill County. And in all, I was able to survey 37 total sites with 23 new sites. A lot of that came from outreach done by the Oregon Zoo, who gave the funding to my specific project within OCRF. And they were able to send out a survey on my behalf to all the residents of Yamhill County on their list. And I was able to get 70 people that responded, wanting me to come to their property and do surveys. And so from those, I was able to pick a subset that were highest priority and do those surveys. Pond turtles were found at 4 of those survey sites that we previously didn't know about. And then I've been able to work with the Oregon Zoo to get additional funding this coming year to actually select 10 sites, 10 of those private sites that are most promising for habitat and connectivity to other populations, and place basking structures on those. Trapping surveys proved very difficult, in part because of COVID, but largely because populations of Northwest pond turtles are fairly small. And so traveling from Portland down to Yamhill on a daily basis to do trapping surveys would not have resulted in a lot of information. So instead I pivoted, and I was able to work with Susan Barnes at the Muddy Valley Habitat Preserve. So all credit goes to her for that survey, but I was able to bring one of my interns. This is a picture of Destiny, my intern. She was able to come out and play in the field that day in the hot sun and get her hands on pond turtles, which she had never considered to be something that she could do in the past. So interns were involved in measuring the turtles, getting hands-on, and then a lot of mentorship happened between all the different volunteers that were there with us that day, who were primarily professionals in the field, and then also myself as well. And so to magnify kind of the trapping surveys, I then did a bunch of trapping surveys back home here in Portland, in the Columbia Slough, and invited my interns to get hands-on experience in that way as well, so that they didn't lack for doing those surveys. Next, right? And then we wanted to do community events. So it was really important as well to not only get the science, but also make sure that the community got the word and got the messaging and understands why this kind of work and this kind of investment in the natural world is important. And so, as I said before, COVID concerns prevented official events. I had been planning to do some official partnering events with the Yamhill Soil and Water Conservation District, et cetera, but that wasn't able to be. And so all of the outreach that was done to the private landowners, as well as when we were at dozens of public parks doing surveys, there were so many one-on-one interactions between myself and park users, as well as between my interns and park users, that I feel like I still satisfied this goal of the project. And it was really special to see my interns teaching the community things that they had just themselves learned over the previous couple of weeks. So that was pretty special as well. Next. And then, as I mentioned, this is part of my larger PhD project. So all of the data collected for this project and will be brought into the larger 7-county project study site that I'm looking at. I'm really working on additional ways to center contribution of women and people of color to biological field studies, including getting additional grant funding to, again, provide paid internships for young women and women of color to participate. And then also partnering with the Immigration and Refugee Community Organization for this next school year to provide additional funding for high school age students, as well as college age students with the project. So all of the pieces of this project that you all helped me get started will have a very long-term, long-range effect. Really, it was that jump start that it allowed me to create all these other partnerships that will help me to continue into the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th years. And so I would love to be able to come back and tell you all of the additional things that we were able to do, again, in most part because of this first chunk of money that I was able to get with you all. So next. And if anybody has questions, I also have my final report for the project that has all of the details, the metrics, and additional photographs that'll be coming your way in the next couple of weeks.
Laura, that was fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, man, that is so gratifying for me to see that type of project. This is exactly what we're trying to do. Mauricio had some great comments in the chat about how this is the perfect example of a nature-centric project executed with an equity lens. And that's
I need a copy of this presentation. I need a copy of this presentation. It's just so, you know, whenever that question comes about, like, so how is it that we can think about justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and conservation at the same time, and long-term sustainability? Boom. That is exactly what I'm talking about.
And that's the question I challenge. That's the question I challenge myself with. Again, working as an ecologist for Portland Parks and Recreation, this is something that my work unit deals with regularly. But when I wanted to get my PhD, I wanted to make sure that it was an intentional piece of my project. And the only thing that I could think was to use, like I said, that power and privilege that I have to try to increase diversity of women, especially in biological field sciences. And one way to do that is to ensure paid internships, because again, a lot of these and some of the lessons learned with these interns, many of them are homeless. So I had 4 interns, several of them were homeless and they don't have bank accounts. So being able to pay them with a paycheck isn't possible. I learned that I literally had to go to the bank and withdraw cash to give to them, because that was the only way that they could use that money to live on. And so there are a lot of lessons learned through this project that, again, I'm going to take forward with me in the coming years and will be amplified in the future. So again, I thank you all.
Laura, Mark Labhart just put a comment on. Mark is on our commission, and we are scheduled to present the commission our current slate of projects, but he was wondering if you might be willing to present this to the commission.
Absolutely.
Oh man, that's going to make us look really good.
Fantastic.
That's not the point, Carl. That's not the point. We're doing really good. We are doing good. That's really what oh man, it's just, I mean, what you just said, Laura, this whole idea of like, how do you care to protect this planet if you're just trying to figure out how to put food in your plate? You can't. There's so many folks that are in this position. And if we touch that one family when they're little and they can see themselves caring about conservation in the future, man, that is where we need to be.
And also reaching out to the Native American community was also important, so that my project isn't solely Western science focused. I wanted to make sure that it's accessible and open and available for anybody to contribute. And so I'm challenging myself in a very personal way by trying to do that. So,
well, Laura, congratulations.
So happy to have you here.
Thank you. Wow, what a great project. Your project made me think of another thing that we have to, as a committee, be thinking about. When we talk about monitoring, there's quantitative monitoring, and you have that. You have measurable outcomes. How many turtles did we see? What did we do? But then there's qualitative monitoring that's harder to wrap your head around. But you very well described that. The impact that you're having on the community, on individuals, we have to figure out how we can measure that and include that in our monitoring, which emphasizes not just the quantifiable, but the quality, the qualifiable ones, the ones that aren't quantified. And so that's really making me having to think about that and how we would be able to measure the success you've had or the impact you've had. So thank you very much for that. It's really wonderful to hear it. So Davia, can you work with Laura about getting together for the commission meeting?
Yes, absolutely. We'll check with the chair and make sure that she's comfortable with it, but otherwise I think that'd be great.
Mark, that was a great idea. Thank you. Wow. Well, that was great. Anybody else have any questions or comments for Laura? Well, thank you so much for taking the time to present that to us, Laura, and we look forward to a final report. And wow, what a great way to end the meeting.
Great,
Well,
thank you all.
Just one more thing, that public comment, we did have Zachary Hunt and Ken McCall And Ken said you can skip him in the interest of time if you want to, but he had an update on the Gilchrist project. And so I leave that to your discretion, Mr. Chair.
What, I didn't follow it. What's my discretion?
If you want to skip Ken McCall's public comment for time.
Why would I skip it?
He suggested that you could drop him. if
I
you
don't
felt
think
like you
so.
wanted to end the meeting.
No, let's hear it. What's he got to say?
Thanks, Carl. It's the conversation we had. Every time I call Carl, he makes me jealous because he's in some exotic place doing something kind of fun. It's like Alaska, Montana, who knows where. Last I talked to him, I think he was looking for a rock big enough to tie himself onto to keep from blowing across the prairie out there in Montana. Very quickly, we contracted ODOT contracted a very good contractor through their processes this past summer. And he finished the fencing up to the extent of the dollars that we have, which amounted to 3 miles on each side. I talked to Carl and he had just passed through that particular part of the world and noticed that where we ran out of money for fencing, there were a couple of dead does right along the highway very shortly after that. So we are still chasing the remainder to finish the fencing and hope to be here like Laura was just a minute ago to give you guys a presentation someplace out there 5 or 6 months into the future. So thanks y'all, keep up the good work.
Ken, thank you for your good work. And you may have heard the process where we codified that matching program. And just to reiterate, if there's an opportunity for us to help with the remainder of that fencing, by all means, come to us with it because we would love to get that finished. So,
yeah, and I've got a couple of offline questions I'll talk to Davia in the next day or two about.
Great.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you.
And the other person was Zachary Hunt, and he left a note in the chat. And he also said that he's not able to turn off his microphone. So I'll refer you to his note in the chat. It was right before Laura started about improving fishing and hunting and reducing licensing fees. And so I'm going to answer his specific question by email, but just want to make sure you saw his comment. And I think that's it.
I think Chris Hager has an announcement. Some of us know it, but maybe the rest of you don't.
I think are you talking about my new gig? Oh yeah. So I guess I just got, well, the reason why I said that really quickly earlier, but I started a new job with backcountry hunters and anglers today, basically. Friday was really my first day, but it was more of a syllabus day, and it was definitely in the trenches today. So apologies for not being on most of the call today, but yeah, so that's about it.
Well, Chris, yeah, there's a lot of, you missed some of the discussion we had about applications that you need to follow up with Davia on.
Yeah, well, today might be, I mean, depending on how those conversations go, this might be my last meeting.
Which would really be unfortunate, Chris. So
but we're hoping it's not. So
yeah, let's see what we can figure out.
We'll keep you up to date on that.
All right. Well, thank you, Chris. Davia, I was looking at the that couldn't comment. Was it Zachary? Is this the public comment he was talking about, the HB 2829?
Yes.
Is that part of our mission? I don't.
So I responded to him in the chat. The language he pulled out is from the whereas statements at the beginning of House Bill 2829,
okay,
and from the purpose of the Alternative Funding Task Force that Mark Labhart chaired in 2016. The actual language from House Bill 2829 that guides your work is improving engagement of the public in hunting and fishing opportunities and in other outdoor recreation opportunities related to and in support of healthy fish, wildlife, and their habitats. And so it is slightly different than what he quoted. And so I let him know that. But I think it's really a question of sort of, have we supported projects that are related to improving access to hunting and fishing? And I think that was part of this committee's conversations in early formation. And the decisions were made to focus our program priorities more broadly on outdoor recreation.
Yeah, I think that there's some things we've done that certainly, like the Ochico Trails project certainly is one. So I think we are addressing some of those concerns, and I will reiterate for everyone that much of the money that we've raised, even still, not through the strategic project program, but otherwise has come from hunters and anglers through the ODF&W website. That's just another reason for us to redouble our efforts to find ways to get funding from people that aren't hunting and fishing to help fund these efforts. And I just bring that up, and we have to keep reminding ourselves where this funding is coming from. Of course, Kaylin is going to get us on the Parks Department checkout area, and we're going to have all kinds of money coming from there. So Kaylin, get on the job there.
You're nervous with those scissors, Carl.
All right. Well, we're 6 minutes over. Davia, have we done all of the things we needed to get done today?
I think so. And I thought maybe we just sort of close out where I can read off the action items, because I think we did a lot today and we don't want to forget that. So the first thing is that I or the new OCRF coordinator will present this suite of projects to the commission and notify the applicants and get rolling on doing the work that you approved today. We'll also open the next solicitation opportunity with a maximum of $50,000 sometime in the next few weeks, and a deadline to apply in February. ODF&W is going to hire a new coordinator. I have that on my list of action items. We actually just got the approval to do that. I just sent the paperwork to HR, and so you should see a job announcement soon, and I'll certainly circulate that to you, and so you can share it with your networks and help us find the right person to shepherd the OCRF. And those are the big things that I thought we should just make sure we hit on today. And if there's anything else people know we need to be doing. You know what? I will add that you all need to reapply for your positions. And Michelle sent me draft language. And so I'll send you an email this afternoon that tells you how to do it.
Okay, so this was a great meeting. I feel good about it. I appreciate everybody's hard work. This is really encouraging that we're making progress like we are. We hope we'll continue to do this. Are we scheduled, Davia, for our next meeting?
Yes, great question. I do have a slide with the meeting dates on it for you. January 10th is the next meeting. And it's the first Monday of the month after that. So January 10th is not the first Monday, but the first Monday is pretty close to the holiday. So I think at that January 10th meeting, our major topic will be how we evaluate the projects that are going to be arriving in February.
Is that scheduled for the afternoon as these ones have been?
Yes, 1 to 4 p.m.
Okay, great. So you look at this meeting schedule, we may not have to meet every month. We'll certainly see what comes up. We appreciate the time that you're taking to put into this. And I guess one last thing I would again ask, especially if we're going to potentially lose Chris, that I really need to, we really need to work on the governor's office to get these positions filled. So Mark Labhart, if there's something I can do to help you with that, please let me know, and we'll try to beef up our membership. But with all that, for a great meeting. And does anybody have any last parting comments? No?
Good job.
Yeah, well, great. Let's call it good then. Thank you all very much for a great meeting.
Bro. I won't give it to the guy, but I'm curious where I can send it. I saw it the other day, Miranda was